Hey friends, tonight, let's explore what getting a little buzzed meant back in medieval times, before pub trivia nights, before neon signs, and long before you could blame your headache on discount spirits. Picture waking up on a straw mattress, the scent of old ale in your tunic. No toothpaste, no ibuprofen, just another morning in the 14th century. And surprise, your breakfast beverage, a nice room temperature mug of something gently brewed and surprisingly popular with all ages. Before we dive in, feel free to like and subscribe if you enjoy these cozy, quirky history deep dives, and let us know in the comments what's the weather like where you're listening. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a little background fan hum, and let's gently slip into the rhythms of another world. You blink into the morning light, try to remember the day, and sit up. The rooster is crowing, and that means hydration time. You reach for your mug, not filled with water, because that stuff is risky. In your village, unboiled water might carry tiny, invisible beasts that ruin your week. So instead, you sip what everyone sips ale. But not the strong stuff. This is small beer, lightly brewed, low in alcohol, and just cloudy enough to make you squint. The important part, it's been boiled, which makes it safer than Geoffrey the blacksmith's backyard well, especially since he fell into it last winter. So yes, everyone drinks beer. You, the kid's grandma. It's less about celebration and more about hydration. If hydration came with a slight side of drowsiness, this ale is homemade, usually by the local alewife, very often your mother. It's a mix of barley oats and centuries of kitchen guesswork. It's not exactly a refined taste. It's earthy, a little sour, occasionally foamy in odd places. But you don't complain. You chew your bread, soften it in the warm mug, and take a sip. Comforting in a mildly questionable way. As you eat, your mother gives you the look. You're drinking too fast. But you tell her, I'm being responsible. I'm staying hydrated. Like a wellness guru with medieval goals. You stretch. You burp discreetly. Outside, the sun climbs. The fields wait. And you feel it, that little morning buzz. Not enough to make you sing. Just enough to make the day feel manageable. Even the monks are in on this. In fact, they're the pros. Monastic brewing uses cleaner water, better storage, and divine patience. Their ale is smoother, richer. Some say it inspires better chanting, but you've got your oat brew, and your chores builds character. Here's your history moment. In many parts of medieval Europe, ale was considered food. It counted toward your daily calories. People often drank several liters per day, depending on season labor and how many goats they had to chase. Stranger still, some versions included herbs like ivy or even soot. Why medicinal benefits? Or at least hopeful guesses. You sip your second mug. This one's a bit stronger, bitter. Your sister may have added anti-ghost herbs again. She swears it keeps evil away. You suspect it just adds flavor. Your father grumbles that beer tasted better under King Henry II, but he says that about everything bread clouds the price of firewood. You nod, smile, pretend to remember a time when ale didn't taste like wet cereal. By mid-morning, you're in the fields. The sun is warm. Your back aches. Time for another sip from your flask. But just a little. You've seen what happens when folks go overboard. Poor Tom once declared his love to a fence post and proposed to a particularly round turnip. Now, the scholarly whisper historians still debate Were medieval people lightly tipsy all day, or just used to it? Was it tradition, tolerance, or a shrugging response to limited options? Either way, you're now halfway through pint number 3. You are historically accurate, you are moderately refreshed, and you're about to try herding goats while humming a song you only remember halfway. Because in the medieval world, a tiny tingle in the brain before noon didn't make you reckless. It made you normal. And let's be honest, if you drink the water and get sick, who's going to feed the pigs? So, you lift your mug to the sun. The brew may be cloudy, the goats may be feisty, but you're hydrated, hopeful, and historically on point. Just try not to spill the rest when the goose charges. You finish your breakfast, wipe your mouth on your sleeve, and step outside into the hum of summer, the kind of golden warmth that makes even hay glisten like it's auditioning for a fairy tale. The field buzzes with insects, and somewhere a rooster is yelling, like the sunrise has personally insulted him. But today isn't just another day of soil and sweat. It's something better. It's Harvest Festival night. You've been thinking about it since midsummer, and not just because it means food music and possibly tripping over your own feet in front of your crush. It's the one night of the year where the entire village agrees letting loose is practically a moral duty, a thank you to the soil, the sky, and perhaps to your neighbor's cow, depending on how the evening goes. By the time the sun melts behind the hills, your hands are blistered, there's straw in your hair, and your smile is held together by dirt and hope. Still, you limp toward the square with the others. Everyone carries something: a wheel of cheese, a smoked fish, a suspiciously optimistic pie, and jugs. Glorious jugs of ale. The square is glowing with lanterns' laughter and the faint scent of burning apple wood and possibly someone's sandal. A recorder squeals like a confused duck drums, pound like they're arguing with your bones, and someone's child is definitely eating too much honey. You find a spot on a bench between two neighbors who may or may not believe in soap. No matter. Tonight everyone's beautiful. You raise your mug. You toast the harvest, the stars, the goat who once ate your laundry. He's here. He nods. The first sip is floral and sweet, brewed with elderflowers, maybe even swiped from the monastery's garden wall. It tingles. It's cozy. It makes your worries fade and your words wobble. But it's not strong. Not by today's standards. Just generous. Like sunshine with opinions. Your coordination relaxes. Your volume increases. You laugh at a joke no one else heard. You say hello to someone you forgot you were mad at. You sing a verse of a song with great confidence and zero correctness. Historical note: harvest festivals were the glue of village life, tied to agricultural cycles, local deities, and the ever-practical goal of eating before winter. A good feast could last days. Repetitive, yes. But after a few rounds, repetition feels like tradition. Curious fact, some towns had actual rules about over-celebrating. One German village fined people who passed out in the fountain more than twice a week with sausages. Enforcement unclear. Delightful regardless. Your second mug tastes different. Spicier. Someone added cloves or dropped a button. You're unsure, but your leg starts tapping. Then both. Then you're dancing. Dancing may be generous. It's more stomping and flailing. But in your mind, it's art. Until you trip over a dog. The dog's fine. You're fine. Everyone claps. Someone hands you a third mug. It's called Harvest Fire. You ask what's in it. No one knows. The guesses range from cinnamon to boiled turnip. You nod, sip, and accept your fate. You look around. The grumpy elder is giggling like a toddler. The baker is strumming a three-string lute. Two teens juggle apples badly. Someone flirts with the shepherd and forgets the sheep. And you realize joy isn't neat. It's muddy feet, sticky fingers, and pretending the sunrise doesn't exist. Spoiler, it does. As night deepens, so does the music. A bone flute appears. You choose not to ask. A group starts chanting something that might be a folk tale or a soup recipe. You join in anyway. You've stopped counting mugs. You feel like soft bread with emotions. You attempt a somersault land, like a dropped sack of onions, and bow like you meant it. Applause. You might have invented rural gymnastics, scholarly whisper. Some say festivals were social glue. Others say they were just controlled chaos to help everyone let off steam. You're currently hugging a scarecrow. You're not here for sociology. Someone calls for a toast to the moon. You raise your mug. The moon doesn't answer, but you think she winks. You wander toward the fire now, just warm embers. You lie back. The stars swirl like they've had their own mug of harvest fire. Your head spins gently, and for once, everything feels enough. The goat lies beside you. He snores. You whisper cheers. You wake up with hay stuck to your face and the vague memory of challenging a goose to a duel. Your limbs ache. Your tunic smells like someone spilled soup on it twice. You're reasonably sure you ended the night under a table, or beside a table, or possibly on a roof. You don't know. No one does. But today is not for moping. Today is Sunday. And in your village, Sunday means something even more important than sleep or a fresh bowl of broth. Today you drink the blood of Christ. Now don't panic. It's not literal. It's communion, the holy ritual, sacred symbolic, reverent, but also in the Middle Ages a little puzzling. Because wine, the good stuff, wasn't always for everyone. Sometimes the priest drinks, sometimes the congregation. Sometimes the wine forgets to show up at all. You splash your face with the coldest water known to humanity. Comb your hair with your fingers. Wipe your hands on your knees. That's formal wear here. Then you trudge up the muddy path to the village church, hoping the priest doesn't notice that you smell like last night's celebration and whatever was in that third mug. Inside, the air is dense with incense beeswax and 50 villagers all trying to look more devout than each other. Candles flicker, Latin chants bounce off stone walls. Somewhere a baby wails, possibly because someone sat on her blanket. You sit, you stand, you kneel. You try not to wobble. And then it arrives, the cup. The chalice glints in the priest's hands like a relic or a live animal. He holds it with reverence. You watch it make its way forward, uncertain whether it will reach you. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it doesn't. Theology is complicated. So is the wine budget. Historical pause. In many medieval churches, only the clergy drank the wine during communion. The people, they received the bread, if that. This wasn't just about hierarchy. It was about ritual purity concerns over spills and a silver cup that was very hard to clean. But on feast days in small villages, the wine flowed just a sip, but enough to make the moment glow. Your turn comes. The wine touches your lips. It burns, but softly. You taste time. You taste sun-warmed grapes. You taste something old and golden, that makes your mind feel like it's wearing a velvet cloak and humming Gregorian chants. It's just a moment, but it lingers. There's something odd about feeling light on your feet in a church, not unsteady, just elevated. Reverent, yes, but also just a little buoyant, as if your thoughts have taken off their boots and decided to float politely near the ceiling. You gaze up at the stained glass, a saint holding a sword and a lamb. You're almost certain the lamb winks. Curious note, some monasteries brewed wine so potent that visitors were warned not to drink too deeply. One traveler, after 3 cups, reportedly confessed the same sins 3 times, including a story about mistaking a chicken for a spy. You're doing fine. Mostly. But as the chants rise, so does a gentle sway in the room. Not exactly dancing, not quite dizziness. More like collective drifting. In medieval minds, wine could be sacred or a bit haunted. There were whispers of cursed chalices, visions in the foam, and monks who drank too much and saw angels. Or very persuasive cats. You wonder, is this wine divine because it's sacred, or sacred because it's rare? Either way, it's working. You rise for the final hymn. Your voice is stronger than usual. Not more accurate, no, not that, but more enthusiastic. You sing of mercy and eternal light and lambs who definitely behave themselves. Your voice lifts like smoke. Your stomach grumbles softly. You take that as a spiritual message. Outside the village, stretches and exhales. Some people head to market, others back to their chores. A few lie in the grass and let the sun handle their thinking for a while. You find a bench, still in church mode, still feeling a little lifted, philosophical even. What if wine was the first prayer? What if the divine lives in a vineyard? Academic sidebar. Was wine in church a bridge to the sacred or a gatekeeper? Did it bring people closer to heaven or remind them who held the cup? Scholars debate. You at this moment are barefoot and mildly glowing. You sip from your own flask just a little and smile. Because whether it's holy or homemade wine has a way of softening edges, of turning silence into song, of turning Sunday into something you remember not for the sermon, but for the way the air shimmered. You walk home slowly. The grass cool beneath your feet. The sky curves gently overhead. You are at peace. You are present. You are technically still in church clothes. And somehow, that feels just right. You're wearing your cleanest tunic, which isn't saying much, it's just the least muddy. Your hair's been combed with a twig. Your shoes match. More or less. But tonight, you're not headed to a field, a tavern, or even the church steps. No, tonight, you've somehow found your way to the very edge of nobility. A banquet at the local lord's manor. To be fair, you weren't exactly invited. You're with the minstrels. Technically, you're their third choice lute carrier, but you're inside. And that counts, especially when you see the wine table. And not just wine. Mead. Golden glimmering sweetened honey mead. Like sunshine if it had a secret recipe. The great hall glows with torchlight and chandeliers. Armor gleams. Portraits stare down with a level of seriousness normally reserved for tax ledgers. The nobles drift about in velvet and fur, wearing buttons that don't seem to do anything except look expensive. They smell like rosewater and expectations. You smell like bread and nerves, and possibly cheese. A goblet is placed in your hand. Not a cup, a goblet. Cold, heavy metal. The kind of vessel that says what you're about to drink has consequences. You sip. It's rich, sweet, slightly floral, possibly mead, possibly dessert disguised as diplomacy. It leaves a golden trail down your throat and makes your thoughts feel like they're warming up for a speech. Around you, the atmosphere shifts. A knight unbuckles his belt, not out of exhaustion, just ambition. A noblewoman chuckles at a joke involving a goose and a wheelbarrow. Someone is juggling pears with a level of grace not usually associated with indoor fruit. Historical pause. In medieval Europe, noble banquets were displays of wealth excess and highly spiced beverages. Mead, imported wines, and ale brewed with herbs and saffron were common at these events, not just for enjoyment, but to demonstrate status and refinement. The stronger the drink, the more elevated the host appeared. By the second course, roast peacock dressed in herbs, the guests are glowing. Some metaphorically, some literally. A few seem to have applied gold powder to their cheeks. You're not sure if it's intentional or just part of dessert. Then comes the game. No official rules, just a drinking horn passed in a circle. Take a sip. Say something clever. If you can't sing. If you can't sing, you get teased by a man named Gerald who's wearing fox pelts and a personality too big for indoor use. You take a turn. You try a poem. It becomes a recipe halfway through. No one notices. Gerald is now reciting something that might be a play or might be instructions for making soap. Across the table, someone declares admiration for the Baroness, or the curtains, or both. Curious detail. Some medieval physicians believed honey wine helped balance the body's humors, particularly chasing away melancholy or the shadowy sadness thought to come from the moon. So yes, in a way, this drink is medicinal. Probably. You raise your goblet to joy, to moons, to any remaining sensation in your toes. Laughter bubbles. Silver clinks. Someone starts a song. The words are unclear, but the spirit is undeniable. You join in with improvised lyrics about Turnip's destiny and a rather dramatic squirrel. The lord of the manor rises for a toast. He sways like a ship in shallow water, lifts his cup high and says, "To moderation," before landing face first in a pie. The applause is immediate. The pie remains intact. Then the edges blur, flaming apples. A dog in a velvet collar. Someone whispering to a statue. You hear the phrase, "indoor jousting," and take that as your cue to step outside. Cool air greets you like a wake-up bell. You breathe deeply. Your tunic is soaked in mead. You do not recall how. You settle on a stone bench next to a nobleman who is feeding breadcrumbs to a pigeon and waxing philosophical. We drink, he mumbles, not just for pleasure, but to remember that we forget. You nod. Deep, or at least deep adjacent. Scholarly aside, were banquets merely indulgence or ritualized performance? Some scholars argue that shared toasts and revelry helped reinforce alliances and soften tensions between lords. Others say it was simply nobles being nobles with shinier cups. You don't know. You're preoccupied with removing a bread roll from your boot. Eventually, you lie in the grass outside the manor, gazing up at a moon that seems slightly amused. Your belly is full. Your thoughts are soft around the edges. Your dreams begin early, and as your eyes close, you think nobility is exhausting, but the mead glorious. You wake up with a velvet curtain wrapped around your head and a half-eaten fig in your hand. The sunlight is unreasonably cheerful, for someone who may or may not have serenaded a meat pie last night. You're not entirely sure if you danced with the Baron's falcon, but you remember apologizing. The falcon seemed receptive. Still, none of that matters now, because tonight the air is different. It's flirting season. In the world of medieval festivities, affection and celebration often arrived hand in hand, sometimes with awkward timing and someone tripping over a goat. But there's no stronger signal of courtship readiness than brushing your teeth with mint leaves and hope and setting off for a midsummer gathering. You've cleaned up as best you can. Your tunic is only lightly wrinkled, your hair only mildly chaotic. The festival is already in full swing when you arrive. Lanterns sway in the trees. Music spills out like a joyful accident, and mugs of spiced wine are making their way through the crowd like chatty butterflies. You accept a mug. The first sip is bold and warm tasting of cinnamon cloves and possibly ambition. Suddenly, your confidence expands. You are now 30% charisma and ready to admire someone's candle-lit smile. You scan the square. Familiar faces, fleeting glances, people you've admired from behind baskets of turnips. Everyone looks just a little more luminous tonight. Candlelight helps. So does a bit of holiday spirit. Historical pause. In medieval times, festivals weren't just for merrymaking. They were one of the few socially accepted spaces where young people could interact, flirt, and occasionally propose through the subtle art of sharing wine, a flower, a ribbon, or a half-drunk mug, all valid tokens of interest. You spot someone across the square. You exchange smiles. You spill your wine a little. This might now be a relationship. You walk over. You attempt charm. They reply with laughter. You tell them they smell like herbs. They tell you you smell like a campfire in a really poetic way. Things are going well. A second mug appears. You raise a toast. Your knees bump. You both laugh freely, brightly, warmly. It might be love, or friendship, or just the effect of midsummer moonlight. Curious historical note. Some medieval love potions were simply wine infused with herbs, honey, and generous belief. Some promised to inspire dreams. Others, well-involved ingredients best left unmentioned during dinner. Whatever tonight's mix is, it's clearly working wonders on conversation. You find yourselves dancing, or rather gently swaying near the music, with the sort of rhythm best described as invented on the spot. It's charming. Your partner steps on your foot and calls it a sign from Venus. You don't know where your mugs have gone, but somehow they're always full. The fire crackles. The stars blink. A musician begins a ballad about vegetables and destiny. No one questions it. You pull your companion aside. With grand sincerity, you proclaim your admiration. You say things like, "Your eyes remind me of golden barley fields, and if I were a turnip, I'd want to be chopped beside you." They blush. Or maybe it's just warm. Either way, they lean in. It's a kiss. Light, uncertain sweet. It tastes of mead and roasted onions. It feels entirely right. And here's the scholarly musing of the evening. Did these joyful wine-lit evenings create real connection, or simply offer momentary escape from solitude? Did medieval folks fall in love in the firelight, or just enjoy forgetting the weight of their daily lives for a while? Your answer is simple, quiet, content, maybe both. As the night winds down and people drift off, some in pairs, some in thought, you sit beside your perhaps kindred spirit on a bale of straw. Neither of you says much. You sip the last of your wine. The embers flicker like tiny heartbeats. You ask their name again. They laugh. You write it on your arm with ash just to be safe. You both agree this has been the best night. You promise to meet again, perhaps by the bridge, or the mill, or simply by shouting each other's names into the wind. Medieval matchmaking is a little improvised. You walk home under the stars, full of something warm and light. Your heart is full. Your shoes are missing. That's fine. You whisper, just loud enough for the moon to hear, I think I like them. A goat bleats in the distance. You take it as encouragement. You've had better mornings. There's a cobblestone pattern on your cheek. Your mouth tastes faintly like boiled cabbage and questionable decisions, and your left shoe has mysteriously become a radish. The sun is unreasonably bright. You blink. You're in someone else's cart, could be a friend, a stranger, or a cousin twice removed. Who knows? But that's all right. Because today, you're traveling. The road winds ahead, dusty and uncertain, lined with bushes, hedges, and the occasional sheep that seems to know your secrets. You've been sent on a task, maybe, to deliver a message, a sack of dried eels, or a wooden box you definitely were told not to shake. The point is, there's a roadside inn up ahead, and that means two things: cheap refreshments and eccentric pottery. You arrive by mid-afternoon. The inn has a sign shaped like a goat, mid-sneeze a doorway that leans to the left, and a roof that audibly sighs in the breeze. Inside, it smells of straw onions and stubborn optimism. Perfect. The innkeeper nods in greeting. You ask for something strong and surprising. They hand you a jug that looks like it once doubled as a garden ornament. The handle is cracked. The glaze is tired. The rim has a faint pink tint, perhaps lipstick, perhaps mildew, perhaps both. You don't ask. You take a sip. It tastes like apples, honey, and a childhood memory you weren't expecting. Your eyebrows lift. Your posture improves. You smile involuntarily. A fellow traveler leans in. That jug, he whispers. Cursed. You pause. They say it gives you strange dreams or unexpected toes. You check. Still 5. So far, so good. Historical interlude. In medieval Europe, mugs and jugs were more than just containers. Some were carved with protective charms. Some were believed to house helpful spirits or cranky ones. Ugly mugs, in particular, were treated with caution. And the one you're holding, let's say it has character. You keep sipping. The tavern fills with music. A man in a feathered hat plays a tune only he knows. A one-eyed dog watches you like it's reading your soul. The room feels warmer, softer, as if the walls are relaxing too. You're fairly certain someone just told a joke in reverse. You laugh anyway. Quirky detail of the evening. Many medieval drinks were flavored with herbs, some calming, some energizing, some said to bring on dreams or visions. Think mugwort poppy, or something labeled only as "do not ingest" near beehives. A few sips could lead to a lovely evening, or a spirited conversation with a candle. You feel excellent, until you feel curious. Another guest offers their own drink from a cup shaped like a chicken. You try it. It tastes like twigs and consequences. You nod politely. They seem pleased. A cloaked figure across the room raises a toast to the eternal fire of forgotten kings. You raise your jug in return. The fireplace crackles louder. You decide not to read into it. Time feels stretchy. The shadows move politely out of sync. You're certain the chair next to you just whispered encouragement. And here's the scholarly question of the hour. Did medieval folks truly believe in cursed cups and haunted mugs? Or were these stories a way to explain odd dreams, sudden illnesses, and the occasional need to blame a particularly ugly jug for life's misfortunes? Back in the tavern, someone is balancing spoons. The one-eyed dog curls up at your feet. The walls are gently humming. You're fairly certain you came here for something. Eels. You request one last drink, but in a different mug. The innkeeper considers, then produces a goblet shaped like a skull. You change your mind. They understand. Eventually, you make your way upstairs, lie down on a mattress filled with hay feathers and maybe betrayal, and fall asleep immediately. You dream of frogs wearing crowns debating tax policy. When you wake, your jug is gone, replaced by a simple wooden cup that smells like mint and second chances. You leave a coin, maybe two. You nod to the dog. He does not nod back. As you step into the golden light of morning, your head light and your hands steady, you realize the innkeeper has gifted you the wooden cup. She's moody, they said. Don't use her for soup. She hates soup. You believe them. You make it 10 steps outside the tavern before realizing the world is spinning in the wrong direction. You pause. You breathe. You attempt to walk in a straight line and instead greet a shrub with the dignity of a man who just mistook it for a monk. Your head is a bell tower, ringing gently with every movement. Your stomach, a rebellious chamber pot on a ship in a storm. You know this feeling. This is medieval nausea, and you're going to experience it. You shuffle off the road into a field privacy dignity, somewhere to commune with nature, while potentially throwing up your body weight in spiced ale and regret. You bend over. Nothing happens. You stand up. The sky mocks you. You sit down. A goat walks by and nods in quiet understanding. Congratulations. You've reached the purging phase. It's not glamorous, but it's historic. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Medieval folks got drunk, and then they got sick. Regularly, visibly, sometimes dramatically. Vomiting wasn't a failure. It was practically part of the evening's agenda. Some thought it was healthy, cleansing, a spiritual reboot for the digestive system. You finally heave, quietly, repeatedly, into the grass where you suspect many have gone before you. You whisper an apology to the worms. Then you lie back sweating and wait for death, or a mild breeze. And here's your historical fact. The act of purging was often associated with medical and moral purification. In some circles, it was believed to release bad humor sins and even excess passions. A 13th century guide for knights casually recommended vomiting as part of balanced health. Just after avoid excessive melon. It doesn't feel holy though. It feels mossy. You start seeing things. Not visions, exactly, more like spiritual suggestions. The clouds above you rearrange themselves into judgmental saints. You think you hear angels. You squint. No, it's just a lute player with poor timing. Eventually, you stagger back toward the road. A peasant walking past nods solemnly. First time they ask. You try to answer, but instead, hiccup so violently, your soul briefly leaves your body. You wander to a nearby stream and rinse your face. Cold water. Sweet relief. You sip cautiously. It's the cleanest thing you've tasted all week, and you're 20% sure it's not cursed. And now, for the odd detail, Some medieval hangover cures included raw eggs, crushed almonds, vinegar-soaked bread, or even owl broth. Yes, owl, as in, go catch one, cook it, and drink it like regret soup. It was thought to rebalance the humors. You decide to skip that and chew on a sprig of mint instead. The dizziness fades a little. Your ears stop ringing. You can now stand without needing to negotiate with gravity. But you're tired and humbled. You find a patch of soft moss under a tree, lie down, and stare at the sky. You feel peaceful, like your body has been thoroughly wrung out and your brain is wrapped in linen. This, you think, must be what monks feel like after confession. And that brings us to the philosophical whisper. Was intoxication in medieval life a sacred threshold, a way to access altered states, commune with the divine, or just survive the mundanity of mud and toil? Some believed drunkenness could bring clarity. Others called it sin. Most just called it Saturday. You drift into a half nap. Your dreams are soft, slow. You're at a feast, but the table is floating. You reach for bread, and it turns into a bird. You smile. The bird bows. You are clearly still very, very not sober. Eventually, someone wakes you, a kind-looking woman with a basket of herbs. She gives you a drink that tastes like licorice and bark. You pretend to like it. She nods. You'll live, she says. Probably. You thank her. You vow never to drink again. A vow that lasts almost 4 days. Because in this world of long days, short lives, and never enough soup drinking isn't about escape. It's about softening the edges. It's the laughter between pain, the song after silence, the memory before forgetting. So yes, you threw up behind a bush while a goat watched, but you also felt, for a few shining, swaying moments, like a poet with stars in your mouth, and you'd probably do it again. Just maybe with less owl broth next time. You come home reeking of mead and questionable life choices. Your tunic is inside out. Your eyes are unfocused. There's hay in your socks and somehow in your ears. You try to open the door quietly, as if that will hide the fact that you've been dancing with the town baker, singing to livestock, and briefly declared yourself king of turnips. Inside, your partner is waiting, not with a warm bowl of stew, not with open arms, but with the look. That timeless expression worn by medieval spouses across all of Europe, half disappointment, half, did you honestly think I wouldn't find out? You're in trouble. Because tonight's story isn't about the joys of drinking. It's about the fallout, the domestic aftermath. See, in the Middle Ages, public drunkenness was common, but private tolerance, not so much, especially when the ale started eating into the grain budget, or when someone came home and vomited into the butter churn. Again, your spouse crosses their arms. You attempt charm. It fails. You mutter something about celebrating the harvest moon. They mutter something about sleeping with the chickens. You go to the shed. Here's the historical fact. Alcohol-related conflict was real in medieval households, and it wasn't just grumbling. It sometimes made it to court. There are documented cases where women sued for separation because their husbands drank too much. One complaint from 1385 reads, "He drinks to excess, then beats the dog and sings of witches." You didn't beat the dog. You hugged it for 2 hours. That's different. Still, the tension is real. You try to explain. You say the mead was medicinal. You say the wine was holy. You say the ale had prophetic properties. None of it works. And here's the quirky tidbit. Some medieval households had literal rules about drinking carved into wood panels. Things like 1 mug before bread, 2 after plow no more when the goat comes home. These weren't legal documents, but they were culturally enforced, especially by people with ladles and short tempers. Tonight you're sleeping on straw, not in disgrace, exactly, just in contemplative exile. You lie down and think about how many times you promised just one more, about how many toasts turned into tumbles, about how sometimes drinking made you feel free and sometimes just foolish. Your spouse has gone quiet. That's worse than yelling. You remember a festival 3 years ago when they danced with you under lanterns, laughing until they cried their cheeks flushed with cider and candlelight. Back when tipsy meant joy and not this clumsy ache of miscommunication. You want to go back to that. So, you do something rare. You get up. You creep into the house. You don't make a speech. You just sit by the hearth, light the smallest candle, and wait. Eventually they join you. Silence. Then stew. You eat. No apology needed. Just shared bread, warm broth, and eye contact that says, try harder. And now, the academic question for tonight. Was medieval alcohol the root of household strain, or just the symptom? Some scholars argue it was economic grain used for beer meant less for bread. Others say it was emotional, a way to cope with hardship that often backfired. You say it's both. That in a world of harsh winters, random plagues, and too many root vegetables, a little escape is forgivable. But respect is still the currency of peace. The fire burns low. Your spouse dozes in a chair. You take the mug beside you and pour it into the garden, not because you're quitting, just because tonight you want to be fully here. Outside, the moon rises. The chickens snore. And somewhere, the town baker is still singing. You'll toast again. Someday. But maybe next time together. And maybe with fewer turnip crowns. You wake up before dawn to the sound of trumpets. Well, trumpets is generous. It's more like someone aggressively sneezing into a horn. But the message is clear. There's a battle coming. You groan, sit up, and pull on your boots. Your stomach grumbles. Your head still echoes faintly from last night's just one sip of a friend's mysterious brown liquor that may have contained honey or shoe polish. But you're a soldier now, or a volunteer, or you just didn't run fast enough when they came looking for warm bodies with minimal screaming experience. And like any good medieval army, the first order of business is lining up for a drink. Because before you march, before you swing anything heavier than a spoon, you get a ration of alcohol. Here's your historical fact. Alcohol was a routine part of military life in the Middle Ages. Soldiers received daily allowances of ale or wine. It wasn't just tradition. It was considered necessary for courage, morale, hydration, and warmth, especially in damp socks. You gulp from your leather flask. It tastes like cider and dust. Still, it warms your chest and makes the idea of swinging a sword slightly less terrifying. You're not alone. Around you, hundreds of men and a few impressively angry women are preparing for combat in various stages of hangover. Some are still drunk. One guy is using a mace as a walking stick and quoting love poetry to his helmet. You all line up. The commander yells something. It sounds inspiring, but also slurred. He may be holding a cup. He may be on his third. And here's where the trouble begins, because marching in straight lines is harder after 2 mugs of spiced ale. You bump into the guy in front of you. He bumps into a goat. The goat starts running. Now you're chasing the goat. Technically, this is now a flanking maneuver. You finally reach the battlefield, some field with high grass and bad lighting, and take your place. You squint at the enemy. They squint back. You all look like cousins at a very tense family reunion. Your heart pounds. Your knees wobble. You tighten your grip on your weapon. The ale dulls the edge of panic, but also most of your depth perception. Then comes the trumpet, the real one. The charge begins. You run forward, or at least in a forward-ish direction. You swing, you shout, you nearly trip over a rock. It's chaos. It's muddy. Someone throws a cabbage. And then as fast as it began, it ends. Your side wins. Or loses. You're not sure. Everyone is cheering. Or crying. Or just lying down. You collapse by a tree, panting exhausted and slightly dizzy. Here's the odd historical tidbit. In some medieval armies, especially mercenary groups, drinking before battle was seen as both ritual and requirement. It loosened the limbs, numbed the fear, and according to one German chronicler, gave even the cowards the voice of lions. Of course, it also meant more people fell over their own swords. Later that night, the survivors gather around a fire. You've cleaned your blade, or borrowed someone else's. You sit beside a man who insists he fought 3 horses, though you're fairly sure they were bushes. Drinks are passed around again. The same flask you drank from before battle now tastes sweeter. Or maybe that's relief. Or trauma with a cinnamon twist. And now, the scholarly whisper of doubt. Did alcohol truly help soldiers fight better? Or just make them care less about the consequences? Some historians argue it built camaraderie. Others claim it clouded judgment, extended battles, and blurred right from wrong. You sip in silence. The stars blink above you. Your hand trembles a little, not from fear, from everything, because war, even with ale, is not a story of glory. It's a story of mud noise and hoping your friend didn't get trampled by a goat. Someone sings softly. You don't know the words, but you hum along. You're tired. You're alive. And in your own strange way, you're thankful for the ale. Not because it made you brave, but because it let you cry without needing an excuse. You've had enough of the noise of fields flutes, festivals, and everything that smells like roasted onions and fear. So you walk. You don't know where you're going, but your feet do. They carry you down a dirt path, lined with yarrow and old secrets. The wind hushes around your ears like it's trying to tell you something you're not ready to hear. At sunset, you spotted a monastery, tall stone walls, a bell tower that leans slightly to the left, like it's tired from centuries of judging people. And at the gates, a monk nods, quiet, peaceful, suspiciously cheerful for someone who's probably had to copy the entire book of Psalms by hand. You nod back and enter. You're not here for prayer. Not entirely. You're here because you've heard rumors. The monks make excellent booze. You don't say that out loud, of course. You say you're on a spiritual journey. You say you're seeking silence. You say you're definitely not here because someone in a tavern whispered the phrase celestial wine before collapsing into a turnip barrel. They believe you, or pretend to. You're given a simple meal, a straw mattress, and a candle that smells like discipline. Later that night, you sneak out. You're quiet, like a mouse. A very loud, clumsy, half-tipsy mouse who steps on every creaky tile imaginable. But eventually, you find it a stone staircase that spirals downward. The cellar. It's cooler here, damp. Smells of oak earth and deep fermentation. Barrels line the walls, huge ancient things, with Latin inscriptions, wax seals, and a level of seriousness you usually reserve for funerals, and very good cheese. You spot a monk already there, hood up, holding a ladle. He sees you. You freeze. Then he grins. Try the Benedictine, he whispers. And here's your historical fact. Monasteries were some of the most advanced brewers and vintners of the medieval world. Monks perfected fermentation techniques, recorded recipes, and treated brewing as both art and devotion. They made beer, wine, mead, and herbal infusions, some of which are still famous today. You take a sip from the ladle. It's warm, spiced, sweet but not cloying. There's a hint of clover and something else, something sharp, like a bell ringing in the back of your mind. You exhale. You feel cleansed. And also slightly like floating. Good, yes, the monk says. We call it sunset mercy. You ask what's in it. He lists ingredients that sound more like a garden spell than a beverage: anise, elderflower, holy basil, wild pear, and a dash of penitence. You don't ask what that last one is. You assume it's metaphorical. You hope it's metaphorical. You wander deeper into the cellar. There are relics here, bottles sealed for 50 years, clay jugs covered in dust, scrolls of old recipes tied with ribbon and prayer. You find a bottle labeled simply, "Do not drink seriously," and quickly put it back. Here's the odd bit of trivia. Some monks believed certain brews could induce visions, divine or otherwise. Others used alcohol in medicinal tinctures or as part of rituals of purification. But always, always, they brewed in silence. Some even took vows never to speak while brewing, believing it preserved the spirit of the mixture. You sit on a barrel. You're offered another ladle. You accept, and then you sing, not loudly, just under your breath. A hymn you heard once as a child, or dreamed, or imagined in a fever. The monk joins in. You harmonize. It's imperfect, beautiful, strange. Because here's the thing. In this quiet, candlelit crypt of sacred inebriation, you realize something. Drinking doesn't have to be wild, or chaotic, or loud. It can be soft, gentle, intentional. A way of remembering something you didn't know you'd forgotten. The scholarly whisper returns. Was monastic brewing a contradiction? A vow of poverty creating luxury? Or was it an extension of spiritual practice, a way to honor the body as much as the soul? Some scholars argue that monks were medieval mixologists. Others say they were the first to understand that ritual is sometimes just structure wrapped in flavor. You rise, thank the monk, and make your way back up the stairs. Outside, the stars have bloomed. The air smells of rosemary and baked bread. The monastery bell chimes once soft like a lullaby for a restless world. You crawl into bed, not drunk, not dizzy, just warm, centered, grateful. You whisper to no one, and to everything mercy tastes like pears. The road is long, the dust is clingy, and your cart smells like onions and ambition. You're no monk, no knight, no plowhand today. Today, you're a merchant, or pretending to be one. You've got a borrowed tunic, a purse with exactly 6 coins, and a list of lies in your back pocket for anyone who asks what you're selling. What you are selling technically is wool. What you're actually here for is wine. Because once a year, the town square fills with color chaos and barrels of alcohol from lands you've only heard of in songs. The fair is here. The merchants are here. The foreign booze is definitely here. You pass jugglers, dancers, farmers, a man dressed as a tree. Every corner holds a booth. Every booth has a drink. You pace yourself. You lie to yourself. Then you try the first one, a copper cup from southern France. The wine is light dry and tastes like sunlight filtered through sarcasm. You nod. You pretend to understand it. Good mouthfeel, you say, as if that means anything. Then you move on. A clay jug from Spain, sweet red, like biting a plum while standing in a cathedral. It leaves your teeth slightly purple and your soul slightly louder. You flirt with a stranger. You forget their name mid-sentence. They don't mind. A glass vial from Byzantium. The merchant wears gold. His mustache twirls into another century. The drink is thick-spiced and a little terrifying. It may contain cinnamon. It may contain prophecy. You drink it anyway. Here's the historical fact. Medieval trade routes carried not only silk and spices, but also alcohol across vast distances. Wine from southern Europe made its way north. Ale from England sailed to Flanders. Even exotic fruit liqueurs from the Islamic world entered Christian markets carefully and sometimes secretly. You're starting to wobble. Not with drunkenness yet, but with a growing sense of sophistication. You've spoken 3 different languages today badly. You've pretended to be a silk dealer, a spice scout, and a goat translator. You try a pale yellow wine from Germany. It's sharp herbal and tastes like it might clean your windows. You declare it complex. The seller bows. You don't know why. Nearby, a man in a feathered hat offers you roumeau from the east. It's thick, golden, almost syrupy. You sip. Your mouth sings. Your knees whisper warnings. You ignore them. Here's the odd tidbit for tonight. Some medieval wines were aged in animal skins, flavored with resin or tree bark, or even filtered through ashes. The goal wasn't purity. It was preservation, boldness, and shock value. If your wine didn't make someone sneeze or cry, was it even worth selling? By mid-afternoon, the fair spins around you in waves of music and multilingual slurring. You're speaking Italian with a Dutch accent. You're buying sausages you didn't mean to. You've acquired a ferret. It may not be yours. You spot a merchant from Venice who offers you grappa, a distilled grape spirit that should absolutely come with a warning. One sip feels like being punched by a vineyard. You bow to him. You may propose marriage. He gives you a second shot. You forget your name. Here's the academic question. Was alcohol in medieval trade a cultural bridge or a risky indulgence? Some scholars say it fostered diplomacy, expanded palates, and built trust. Others argue it encouraged excess smugglers and economic imbalance, especially when rulers tried to tax every barrel 3 times. You don't know. You just traded your shoes for a bottle labeled "Do Not Open" before midwinter. You collapse on a pile of rugs and stare at the sky. The fair continues without you. Someone nearby is playing a lute badly. Someone else is arguing about raisins. You hold your last drink, a smoky black concoction from the north. It tastes like charcoal and romance. You love it. Or maybe you just love being alive here in this swirl of languages, scents, and stories. You close your eyes. The world tilts gently. You clutch your mystery bottle to your chest and whisper, "I'm a merchant of dreams." The ferret nods. You've got a cough. Not the charming, delicate kind that wins you sympathy and soup. No, this one rattles your ribs like dice in a cup. You've tried everything rest garlic pacing in dramatic circles. Nothing helps. So you do what any reasonable medieval person would do. You visit the apothecary. It's a narrow shop, tucked between a fishmonger and a man who claims to sell regret-free cheese. The air inside smells like dust herbs and secrets. Jars line the walls, some filled with roots, others with powders, one with something that might be a lizard wearing a wig. The apothecary appears from behind a curtain. Robes, beard, eyes that suggest he hasn't blinked since the last lunar eclipse. He takes one look at you and says, "Yes, you need a tonic." You nod, because of course you do. Who doesn't? He pours a mixture into a goblet, amber liquid, thick and swirling, like it knows too much. "Drink this," he says, "but only once the stars align." You drink it anyway. It burns. It sizzles down your throat like liquid fire wrapped in honey. Your ears ring. Your nose runs. Your soul briefly leaves your body to take a lap around the shop. You blink. What was in that? He smiles. Mostly wine. Some crushed wormwood, a touch of clove, a whisper of nettle, and vinegar. You thank him, then cough again. Here's the historical fact. Alcohol was a cornerstone of medieval medicine. Tinctures, tonics, and elixirs all used wine brandy or distilled spirits as their base. Why? Because alcohol extracted medicinal compounds from herbs, and because it was safer to drink than most water. You leave the apothecary feeling slightly better, or maybe just slightly drunk. Later at the tavern, you brag about your healing wine. Someone offers you a remedy for heartbreak, a mulled wine mixed with thyme rose petals and enough cinnamon to induce enlightenment. You try it. You forget who you were sad about. Another drink promises to restore memory. It does not. But it tastes like pine needles and confidence, so you pretend it worked. And here's your odd detail for the night. Some medieval medicines were genuinely helpful, while others were straight up dangerous. Wine mixed with myrrh could ease pain. Wine with lead shavings, not so much. One infamous cure for melancholy involved drinking wine infused with ashes of a raven. For clarity, you once tried that one. You did not achieve clarity. You achieved dramatic sneezing and a brief fear of birds. Still, the line between medicine and merriment stays blurry. You hear of a traveling healer nearby who brews a wine that removes curses. You find him in a tent made of mismatched cloth and questionable promises. He offers you a cup. You drink. You sneeze. You blink. Nothing changes. You had no curse, he says. You're just bad at mornings. You accept this. Now the scholarly whisper, did medieval people believe in alcohol as true medicine? Or was it just the only option that didn't immediately kill you? Some scholars say the faith was real. Others say it was desperation disguised as chemistry. You sip another tonic. This one's called Liver's Revenge. It tastes like tree bark and sadness. You take a second sip. Somehow it's better. Back in the village, you feel improved. Not healed, not holy, but functional. And sometimes that's all you need. You cough one last time. It sounds softer now. You raise a cup of ginger wine to your lips. Not for pleasure, not for prayer, just because sometimes the cure is simply believing that something will help especially if it comes in a nice bottle. You lean back on a hay bale watching the sky. The stars do not align, but your spine finally does, and your head for once feels quiet. The village green is alive with laughter. Children are chasing chickens. Chickens are chasing children, and someone is juggling apples like the fate of the harvest depends on it. A pot bubbles over a fire. Bread bakes somewhere in the distance. And you're holding a mug of small beer. It's warm, watery, barely alcoholic, tastes like bread crust and rainwater. And beside you, a 7-year-old is holding a mug too. They raise it. You clink. No one bats an eye. Because in this world, kids drink too. Not wine, not spirits, but weak ale, small beer table brew. It's as normal as soup. Probably safer than soup if the village stew maker is having one of their experimental weeks. You sip together. You share a grin. The child tells you their name is Margot, and they once saw a cow give birth backwards. You nod respectfully. They are clearly wiser than you. Here's the historical fact. In medieval Europe, children routinely drank small beer or diluted wine, not to get drunk, but because clean water was often dangerous. Ale was boiled fermented and mildly antiseptic. It kept kids from dying of dysentery, which is a great selling point if you're a parent with limited options. You sit on a log Margot beside you and watch a group of teenagers play a game involving Styx hats and very poor decision-making. One of them is drinking cider. Another has a goblet of watered-down mead and a dangerous amount of confidence. You wince. That'll be a problem in about 20 minutes. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some towns had age expectations for drinking, starting young, easing into stronger drinks by adolescence. But no one checked IDs. There were no IDs. If you could carry a cup and not immediately spill it, you were old enough to sip. You remember your first cup. You were 6. You spilled half of it on your tunic and told everyone it made you smarter. You then walked into a wall. Your mother handed you another and said, "Try again. Slower this time." Now, the academic murmur floats in did childhood drinking in the Middle Ages create a culture of casual dependence, or simply reflect a world without safe alternatives? Some argue it normalized alcohol too early. Others say it was a necessary adaptation. Everyone agrees water was the real villain. Back in the square, a toddler is sipping from a carved wooden cup, supervised by a woman who looks like she's fought both wolves and bureaucracy. The child is giggling, hiccuping, and somehow covered in flour. You lean over to Margot. What's in their cup? She shrugs. Probably carrot beer. You blink. That's not real. She stares at you. Everything is beer, if you believe hard enough. You accept her logic. The day wears on. The cups keep circulating. You see elders handing toddlers tiny mugs, teens pouring modest rounds, and parents teaching the sacred art of not dropping your cup while dancing. It's oddly wholesome, because here's the quiet truth. These small drinks aren't about getting drunk. They're about participating, about being part of something, whether you're 6 or 60. A sip to mark a meal, a toast a moment, a liquid connection passed across generations. You look down at your mug. It's nearly empty. You offer the last sip to Margot. She shakes her head. You need it more. You're older. Fair enough. You drink. The sun sets. A chorus of frogs begins. Someone starts singing a lullaby in 3 different keys. Margot dozes beside you. Her cup tilts gently in her lap. You think maybe growing up here isn't about the drink itself, but the trust that comes with it. The belief that you can handle just a little of the world, one careful sip at a time. You tuck her cup beside the fire to dry. You wrap her in your cloak, and then you raise your own one last time to Margot, to small beer, to the slow, careful growing up of a medieval child, one mug at a time. It's raining softly, the kind that doesn't bother to ask permission. You walk through it with your hood up and your head down, boots squishing in the mud with every step. The fields are quiet. The goats are hiding. Even the geese have decided today is for reflection. You're on your way to church, not for a feast, not for a wedding, not for a quick sip of the sacramental before slipping back into the party. No, today is for something heavier, something quieter. Today is for confession, and your stomach is full of nerves and bread and 3 too many cups of last night's plum wine that you swore would help you sleep like a monk. Instead, you dreamed about dancing with a giant fish that kept asking you to explain taxes. You reach the chapel. Stone walls, mossy steps, a door that creaks like it's judging you. You step inside. The air smells of wax and wood smoke. Shadows move gently across the pews. A single candle flickers near the altar, like it's unsure if it should keep burning. You kneel. You wait. And then the priest appears. Not stern, not smiling, just present. He leads you into the small confessional. You sit in the dark, breathing slowly, fingers tangled in your own cloak. Then comes the question, what do you wish to confess? And it all comes out, not just the big things, not just that night you borrowed someone's goat and returned it 3 days later with braids, but the little things too, the broken promises, the selfish thoughts, the wine-fueled insults you tried to pass off as jokes. You mentioned the plum wine, the other wines, the cider with herbs, the time you toasted to eternal boldness and ended up under a cart. You speak of fear, of shame, of the blur between drinking for joy and drinking to forget. And here's the historical fact. Confession in the medieval world wasn't just religious, it was emotional infrastructure. People needed space to unload guilt, especially in a world where life was short, unpredictable, and soaked in superstition. And yes, drunkenness was a common topic. Too much wine led to loose lips, angry fists, broken things. Confession cleaned the slate. The priest listens. He nods. He does not scold. He offers you a penance, go in peace. And maybe fewer toasts to boldness next time. You smile, but you don't leave just yet. You stay a moment longer, alone, watching the candle. And that's when the feeling hits. Not guilt, not shame, but a deep, strange kind of softness, like forgiveness poured itself into your ribs and settled there. You whisper to no one in particular, I'm sorry for the things I say, when I'm trying not to feel anything. And now, the quirky detail, some medieval churches kept lists of the top 10 drunken sins. Swearing, stumbling into sacred spaces, singing lewd songs to statues, and once famously bathing in holy water because it was warm and I was chilly. That guy was fined 3 turnips and a chicken. You rise. You step out into the rain again. It's lighter now, almost pleasant. The world hasn't changed, but you have. You stop by the bakery and buy a loaf still warm from the oven. You nod to the apothecary, who hands you a sprig of mint just because. You walk slowly, the way someone does when their thoughts are no longer chasing them. And here's the academic debate floating quietly in the background. Was confession truly about redemption or just a way to reset the social order? Some scholars say it was a tool for conformity. Others say it provided real psychological relief in a world that offered little else. You don't know. You just know that you feel lighter, that tonight you'll raise a mug, not to forget, not to escape, but to begin again. A quiet toast, alone maybe, or with a friend. A small drink, a fresh start. You smile. You are clean. Well, emotionally, you still smell like plum wine. The fire is low. The cup is full. And for once, the night is still. You sit on a wooden bench, worn smooth by time, and elbows your cloak pulled around your shoulders like a promise. Outside, the wind sighs through the trees. The stars blink lazily like they've heard every story and still want to hear one more. In your hand is a small clay mug, simple round, with a chip on the rim, where someone once dropped it during a toast to being invincible. They were not. This is your final drink of the day, not to celebrate, not to forget, not even to sleep, just to mark a moment. You sip. It's something you brewed yourself. Weak sweet, a little cloudy, tastes like apples and rainwater. Not fancy, not strong, but yours. You close your eyes and think of all the cups before this one, the ale at dawn, the cider with strangers, the mead at the feast, the strange wine you drank in a barn while someone played spoons with unsettling intensity, the herbal tonic that nearly made you confess your sins to a carrot. Each mug carried a story, some loud, some blurry, some that still taste like regret. And here's your final historical fact. For medieval people, drinking wasn't just an act, it was a rhythm. It marked beginnings and endings, births and deaths, unions and partings. A shared cup was a shared moment, a private one, a kind of prayer. You raise your mug to no one, or maybe to everyone, to Margot and her fearless theories, to the monk with the pear-flavored secrets, to the goat who never judged you, to the stranger at the fair who taught you how to fake knowing about wine, to every person who lifted a drink and said, I am still here. And here's the strange little detail. Some people were buried with their favorite mugs, not jewelry, not swords, a cup. Because even in the afterlife, maybe there's still time for one last toast. You take another sip. It's just right. The fire cracks. The shadows lean in. The world quiets around your breath. And now, the final question, the one scholars still whisper about. Was all this drinking a way to endure life? Or a way to make it feel full? Was it an escape? A ritual? A rebellion? A comfort? Yes, maybe all of it, maybe none. Maybe that's the point. You smile. You don't feel drunk. You feel anchored, present, soft around the edges, but sturdy in the middle. You finish your drink. You set the mug down gently. You don't need another. Tonight you are full, not just of cider, but of memories. And as you lay back, eyes heavy, you think, this time, I didn't drink to disappear. I drank to remember that I'm still here. The embers glow. The sky leans closer. The wind carries your exhale across the grass. And somewhere in the distance, someone else raises their mug, maybe for you. You're warm now, wrapped in the hush of night, with the last story folded gently into your mind like a wool blanket pulled up under your chin. The fire has faded to embers. The world is quiet again, and so are you. All the cups are empty. All the songs are done, but the echo of them stays soft and golden, like the last note of a lullaby, still humming somewhere in your ribs. You've wandered far tonight, through muddy streets and candlelit halls. You've danced badly, laughed loudly, sat alone in the dark, with your thoughts clinking softly, like coins in an old mug. You've remembered what it's like to be human in a world that didn't always give you the luxury of pause. And maybe now you see it, that even back then, even in a time of plagues and pottage, people just wanted to feel something warm in their hands, a connection, a moment of levity, a shared sip of something that made the day feel just a little less heavy. So if you've ever raised a glass to joy or to grief or to the ache of being alive, you are in very old company. And tonight, you don't need anything more, just this stillness, just this breath, just this truth: you are here, and you have been heard. That's the story for tonight. May your dreams be filled with wonder and peace. Hey friends, tonight, let's explore the kind of sacred experience that happens when a monk hands you a cup and says, "Drink this and tell no one." It's pitch black inside the monastery. A single candle flickers against cold stone. You don't know if this is medicine penance or a shortcut to see St. Peter in person. So before you relax, take a second to like and subscribe if you find value in what we share. And tell me in the comments, what time is it where you are? And where in the world are you listening from? Dim those lights, fire up a fan for that cozy background sound, and let's settle in for the journey ahead. The monks you see are not just guardians of sacred texts and awkward chants. They're also, how do I say this delicately, chemical artisans with access to herbs, honey, and dangerously large brewing basins. You've followed Brother Jean-Claude down a winding stairwell beneath the scriptorium, past shelves of pickled eels and fermented radishes, to what he calls the quiet room. There's a bubbling cauldron, a carved wooden ladle, and several pewter cups that look like they've never been washed. Jean-Claude smiles at you like a man who hasn't spoken to another soul in 8 months and pours you a dram of what he calls the divine elixir of St. Basil's vision. You ask what's in it. He blinks slowly and says, "Faith." You sip. It tastes like cloves regret and a flash of childhood trauma. It burns like confession. It warms like sin. And immediately you feel a tingling in your fingertips and the strange certainty that the floor is not quite where you left it. Brother Jean-Claude nods approvingly. "The tongue of angels," he says, "also licorice root, and a touch of fermented gooseberry." You are now seated in what appears to be a chair, but may also be a bucket. Jean-Claude begins to chant softly, and for a moment you feel as though the walls are singing with him. You're not sure whether you've achieved spiritual clarity or just consumed medieval jet fuel brewed under vows of silence. Here's the thing. Monks in the Middle Ages weren't just brewing wine for Mass. They were mastering fermentation science before it was cool. Their cloisters became some of the earliest experimental laboratories. One surviving record from the 9th century describes a monk distilling essence of celestial warmth, which is medieval Latin for "this will knock your sandals off." And unlike the local tavern, where the goal is rowdy joy, the monastery aims for transcendence. You're not just getting wasted, you're ascending. Or at least you think so, until you try to stand and discover your legs have declared independence. Now here's the historical debate. Were monks intentionally brewing these concoctions for spiritual experiences, or were they just really bored and had access to herbs no one else could afford. Some scholars argue these elixirs were meant to aid prayer and reflection. Others say it was low-key self-medication, wrapped in theology. After all, if your job involves 8 hours of copying psalms with a goose feather, wouldn't you invent minty glowing liqueur? You lean against the cold wall and realize Jean-Claude is now reading your aura with a spoon. He tells you your soul smells like time and unresolved longing. You nod. Seems fair. From the other room, you hear a bell ring once. It means evening prayers or bedtime. Jean-Claude offers you one last sip, which he calls the closing hymn. You take it. You see stars. You see your third-grade teacher. You see St. Basil waving from the cloister roof. The candle dims. You're not asleep, not awake. Somewhere in between. Hovering. Blessed. Slightly drooling. And honestly, that's not a bad way to end a medieval Wednesday. You wake up with straw in your hair, a faint echo of Gregorian chants in your ears, and a pressing need to find water that doesn't smell like cloves. But you're not in a monastery anymore. Tonight, you're somewhere grittier, somewhere noisier, somewhere that smells like roasted onions and damp wool. You're in a medieval market town, and someone's about to show you what real underground drinking looks like. You see, official taverns are fine if you enjoy watered ale, passive-aggressive barmaids, and the occasional knife fight over cheese. But the real connoisseurs of chaos, they drink in cellars. Tonight's host is a man called Alain. He sells radishes by day and ferments questionable substances by night. He's got a wink, like a fox in breath that could strip varnish. Alain gestures for you to follow him behind a fish stall, lift a wooden hatch, and descend into what might generously be described as a moldy cave with aspirations of being a bar. You duck under a beam, hit your head on a hanging pig bladder, and arrive in a room lit entirely by whale oil and bad decisions. There's a barrel labeled, "Do Not Touch." Seriously, a stool with 3 legs and no shame, and a group of peasants already singing a tune with no discernible melody or lyrics, just pure emotional volume. The drink of the night. Alain calls it bouillante, which translates roughly to the thing that makes your teeth buzz. It's made from fermented turnips goat whey and a splash of pear if he's feeling generous. Tonight, he isn't. The first sip is a betrayal. The second sip is revenge. The third makes you oddly poetic. Here's the history bit. Medieval Europe had a whole shadow economy of unofficial booze. Laws and taxes often made it expensive or illegal to brew or sell strong drink without a license. So people did what people always do. They went rogue. Homemade distilleries popped up in barns, under floorboards, and yes, behind radish carts. These were the birthplaces of local moonshines long before the moonshine brand was invented. And while the quality ranged from surprisingly smooth to this might be paint thinner, the popularity never wavered. In fact, by the 14th century, some towns had to create whole task forces to find and shut down underground drinking dens. Picture a medieval police raid where instead of flashlights, they use torches, and instead of shouting freeze, they say, by order of the guild. The fun part, most of these dens came with their own unwritten rules. For example, if the cup floats, you drink it. If it sinks, you bless it and leave it for the ghosts. Back in Alain's cellar, the night's getting loud. Someone's trying to play a one-string fiddle. Someone else is crying about a lost chicken. And Alain is holding up a jar filled with a liquid that glows faintly under candlelight. He calls it the widow's giggle. You politely decline. He shrugs and drinks it himself, then laughs so hard he topples into the turnip barrel. You're now feeling bold. You challenge a woman named Marta to a toast-off. She slams her mug down and says, "I drink for my ancestors." You panic and say, "I drink because I was told to." Fair. The cellar spins slightly. Or perhaps the earth just finally noticed you've been standing on it this whole time. Either way, you decide to sit. Someone passes you bread. It's either a peace offering or a palate cleanser. Doesn't matter. You eat it. The debate among scholars is whether these secret dens were acts of resistance or just necessity. Were they political or just practical? Some argue they reflect the working class's pushback against feudal control. Others say they were just places where people could sing cry and maybe forget for a night that everything they own is rented from a man named Philippe who smells like cheese. You leave the cellar at dawn, eyes puffy, tongue fuzzy, soul slightly rearranged. Alain waves from behind his stall, now surrounded by radishes again. He winks. You nod. It's a silent agreement we never speak of what happened. And we definitely never drink the widow's giggle again. It's midsummer now, and the air smells like trampled herbs, fresh sweat, and overripe fruit. You're standing in the middle of a village square that's been hastily decorated with ribbons, wheat garlands, and exactly one goat wearing a crown of daisies. Congratulations! You've wandered straight into a medieval rural festival, and absolutely no one is sober. You don't know what's being celebrated. Possibly the solstice, possibly a local saint, possibly just the fact that the mayor's pig finally gave birth. But what matters is that someone has handed you a wooden cup filled with something yellowish and bubbling. You ask what it is. The man grins and says, "Sunshine." With legs. You sip it. Your left eye twitches. You're either allergic to joy, or this is cider made by someone who has never measured anything in their life. Either way, you're in it now. The band starts playing. It's just three guys with drums, one with a sack pipe, and a fourth man slapping a wooden board while shouting in a dialect no one even in the village understands. A dance begins somewhere between stomping and near combat, and you're dragged into it by a child who looks suspiciously powerful for their height. Here's the thing. Medieval festivals were where alcohol did its most important work. Not in dark taverns or royal feasts, but here among neighbors' cousins. And that one guy who thinks he's descended from Charlemagne. Everyone drank. Everyone danced. And everyone had at some point fallen into the apple barrel and emerged spiritually changed. The drinks of choice, often cider mead, perry pear cider, or a thick ale brewed by your Aunt Gertrude with wild yeast and the soul of a confused raccoon. And the strength, variable. It depended on who made it, how long it fermented, and whether or not someone remembered to label the barrel that turned your cousin into a folk legend last year. You notice a man named Eustace, wearing a cape made entirely of old aprons. He offers you a drink he calls Summer's Elbow. You ask what's in it. He pauses, then says, "Mostly plums." Some regret. You nod and drink. It's tangy. It's fizzy. It's probably illegal in 3 kingdoms. Now, academically speaking, these festivals served as important social safety valves. Scholars debate whether the drunkenness was a form of ritual chaos intentionally allowed as a way to release tensions before they built into revolt. Others argue it was simply celebration, a brief moment when the hardship of daily life was put on hold for music, fermented produce, and wildly inappropriate puppet shows. Someone hands you a fried pastry. Someone else is jousting with wooden spoons. A group is reenacting a local myth involving a goose a well and two kinds of cheese. You can't follow the plot, but you applaud anyway. It feels correct. A historical detail festivals often blurred the lines of class and decorum. Even the local lord might show up and awkwardly pretend to enjoy the muddy dancing. It was one of the few times peasants and nobility shared a space, though rarely the same drink. The peasants had ale with personality. The nobles had wine with attitude. As night falls, the pace picks up. The dancing is faster, the singing louder, the drinks less distinguishable. A boy begins telling fortunes using the foam in mugs. Yours says, "Travel soon, bring bread." Okay. The moon rises. The goat is asleep under the maypole. Eustace is leading a slow parade of people humming a song that may or may not be about tax evasion. And you're lying in the grass, watching stars swirl like cider bubbles, wondering if you'll remember any of this. Probably not. But maybe that's the point. The sun is high, the banners are flapping, and your shoes are definitely too muddy for this kind of event. You've been invited accidentally, possibly, to a noble wedding, and you're trying very hard to pretend like you belong. The trick, walk like you own at least one tapestry, and don't make eye contact with the roast swan. The bride looks radiant. The groom looks terrified. And you look like someone who's one sip away from turning this into a scene. Because yes, there's wine. So much wine. It flows like gossip through the noble courts, and you, dear guest, are currently cradling your third goblet of something labeled imported, which probably means from 3 villages away. You try to pace yourself. You try to remember etiquette. But that's difficult when you're sitting next to a baron who's already arm wrestling a priest and across from a duchess who's hiding pickled onions in her sleeves. It's chaos. But it's polite chaos with silverware. A historical aside, medieval noble weddings weren't just unions of people. They were strategic chess moves with very expensive snacks. You're not just watching a love story unfold. You're witnessing an alliance being cemented with duck pate. The feasting goes on for hours. There are at least 9 courses, and between each, a new type of drink appears. You have your classics, claret-spiced red wine, hippocras, wine boiled with sugar and spices, and mead that tastes like someone whispered honey into a thunderstorm. Then there are the strange ones, a frothy almond milk liquor that smells like soap and joy, and a cloudy green cordial served in a glass shaped like a tiny tower. You drink it anyway. It tastes like pears and ambition. At some point, someone announces a toast. You stand to join in, forget what you were saying halfway through, and end up praising the concept of chairs. Applause erupts. Nobles are either very drunk or very generous. A curious detail, weddings were one of the rare times when even rules had rules. You had to drink when a toast was made. You had to accept what was poured, and you had to pretend the entertainment made sense even if it involved masked jugglers impersonating Roman emperors while reciting poetry about grain prices. You excuse yourself for air and find yourself in a candlelit hallway where a minstrel is crying softly because he dropped his lute into the gravy boat. You comfort him. He offers you a sip of his personal stash, a plum liqueur aged in terror and secrecy. It goes down like velvet and regret. Back at the table, dancing begins. Nobles take delicate steps, each trying not to trip on their own status. You, however, attempt something called the harvest jig and knock over a centerpiece shaped like a siege tower. No one seems to mind. In fact, the Baroness joins in. Academics debate whether noble weddings were truly joyful or simply performative. Were they celebrations of union or masks for political maneuvering? Either way, they got everyone wildly poetically tipsy, which is historically the fastest route to temporary peace. As the night deepens and the moonlight filters through stained glass, someone pulls out a bottle wrapped in velvet. For the final toast, they whisper. You sip. It's strong, sweet, and slightly bitter, like love after 3 airs. You don't remember how you leave, but when you wake, there's a feather in your hair, a silver spoon in your pocket, and a vague memory of waltzing with someone who claimed to be a cousin of the king. You are not invited to the second day of the wedding. That's okay. One night was enough. 3 noble jokes before bedtime. Nothing says, I love you like 14 kinds of wine, and a juggler in a toga. Wedding rule. If you can't name the drink, you probably shouldn't have a 4th cup. You haven't truly toasted until you've accidentally saluted the roast boar. You don't quite know how you got here. One minute you were following a tray of fig-stuffed pastries down a quiet stone corridor, and the next you've stumbled into what appears to be a secret wine chamber inside a castle. The door creaked open, like it had been waiting centuries for you. It smells like dust cloves and expensive mistakes. Congratulations, you've been chosen. At first, you think you've interrupted something sacred. The room is dim. The shelves tower with dusty bottles, and in the corner sits a massive barrel labeled simply, No. You whisper an apology to no one in particular. Let's pause for a moment. You've heard rumors of these places. Hidden behind thick walls and tapestry-covered passageways, medieval castles often contained private cellars stocked not just with everyday ale, but with legacy wines, medicinal infusions, and something mysteriously known as bishop's cordial. It was said to be brewed during eclipses and consumed only when bishops misbehaved, which they did, frequently. Back to your current situation. The room is empty. The silence hums. You step carefully across the stone floor past amphorae sealed with wax, past flasks bearing family crests and ominous Latin warnings. You find a bottle shaped like a falcon and another shaped like a question mark. You choose the falcon. You always go with birds. The cork gives a satisfying pop. Inside is something deep red syrupy and smelling faintly of cherries, firewood, and gilt. You pour a thimbleful into a nearby goblet that might also be a candle holder and sip. It's incredible. You sit down because standing suddenly feels like an unnecessary ambition. The wine warms you from the inside out. It tastes like old secrets, noble betrayal, and at least one tax scandal. A quick historical aside, while you settle in some noble families, kept wines so rare they were used as bargaining tools in negotiations. There are documented cases where treaties were sealed with casks of sun wine, a golden dessert wine, aged for decades in sunlight and prayer. Others stored vintage ales from the Crusades bottles corked with wax and remorse. The more obscure the drink, the more powerful its owner seemed. Your drink is probably one of those. You lean back and examine the rest of the room. There's a shelf labeled tonic or trouble, another one labeled just don't, and a locked cabinet with a stained glass window showing a monk and a goose in what appears to be a heated argument. You laugh. The wine helps. Then you find the book. It's small bound in leather, entitled in careful script, Experiments and Accidents Volume 3. You flip through. It contains hand-drawn recipes for drinkable concoctions that walk a very thin line between medicine and performance art. One involves heating rosewater honey and snake root under a full moon. Another simply says, add ginger until the truth is revealed. You're tempted. You gather a few ingredients. You attempt the one labeled the Dreaming Squire. It calls for 1 drop of elderberry ink, a splash of clove wine, and a whispered wish. You improvise. You whisper, I hope this doesn't kill me. It doesn't. Probably. It does, however, make everything feel slightly weightless. You begin humming. The barrels seem to hum back, and then you hear it a voice. Not a ghost. Not a warning. Just someone behind the wall saying, I think I heard something. You freeze. 2 things you know about medieval secret cellars. They are rarely empty for long. The people who guard them do not take kindly to uninvited connoisseurs. You grab your goblet, the book, and the bird-shaped bottle. You hide behind a stack of dusty amphorae. Through a crack in the door, you see 2 guards enter, casually chatting about the merits of mint wine versus time mead. They don't spot you. One opens the no barrel and takes a sniff, recoils, and mumbles, still cursed. They leave. You exhale. Your heartbeat sounds like a snare drum played by a bard on deadline. It occurs to you now that medieval castles weren't just stone and grandeur. They were sensory labyrinths, filled with rooms that served as both storage and stories. The wine chamber was not just for drink. It was a history lesson, a vault of forgotten mistakes, a memory soaked in alcohol and sealed with a family crest. You take one last sip and whisper your thanks to the wine, to the room, to the goose in the stained glass. And then you sneak out quietly, reverently, a little sideways. By the time you return to the main hall, no one has noticed your absence. They're too busy arguing over whether eel pie pairs better with fig wine or herbal ale. You smile. You nod. You've seen things. Later that night in your room, you open the little book again. You notice the last page has a recipe titled, For Tomorrow Morning. It lists water mint, bread crusts, and an apology to the liver. You make a mental note. You've had wine in cellars, ale in taverns, and something questionable in a chipped horn behind a barn. But tonight, you're about to taste monastic beer, brewed by monks guarded by tradition, and strong enough to make you speak fluent Latin for 5 minutes before realizing you never learned it. It starts with a rumor. Someone at the feast whispers about a visitation ale brewed only once a year by an order of silent monks. It's called Trinitas Fortis, which roughly translates to the Strong Trinity, though some believe it's just the noise you make after drinking it. You, of course, need to try it. So you find yourself walking a moonlit road toward the abbey, past grazing sheep who look at you with the quiet judgment of those who've seen too much. The air smells of lavender and distant mischief. The abbey gates are open. Always open. Hospitality, they say. Also, because no one ever successfully steals from monks who brew alcohol stronger than most confessions. Inside, you're greeted not with words, but with nods. A young monk in sandals and a tunic gestures you toward a long wooden bench beside a hearth. A single cup is placed before you. It's wide, heavy carved from walnut wood, and engraved with a curious symbol, 3 overlapping fish. No one speaks. You sip, and you see God. Or at least a very persuasive candle flame that winks at you like it knows your middle name. The taste is layered. First honey, then fig, then something smoky like cedar, or regret. The aftertaste lingers like a hymn you only half remember. It's not beer, it's memory and mystery in liquid form. Let's pause here for the historical tidbit. Monks in the Middle Ages were not just brewers, they were chemists, theologians, and flavor artists. Their beers were often richer in nutrients than water sometimes called liquid bread. In some monasteries, fasting monks consumed only beer during Lent, which probably explains a few hallucinated miracles. The beer you're drinking now has a kick measured not in percentages, but in visions. You begin to sway gently to music that may or may not exist. One monk raises an eyebrow. It might be approval. Then comes the cheese. Yes, monks don't just make beer, they pair it. A small wedge of cheese is placed beside you. It smells like patience and hay. You try it. The beer changes. The world changes. You begin to understand the rhythm of the stars, or at least the seating arrangement of the monks around the fire. There's a sudden loud snore from the corner. A particularly old monk has passed out mid-prayer. No one moves. This is normal. You lean toward the young monk beside you and whisper, "What's in this stuff?" He whispers back, "Time." Of course, another historical curiosity, certain monastic ales included herbs believed to enhance spiritual visions. These weren't hallucinogens exactly, but combinations like sage mugwort and yarrow that, when steeped correctly, created a sensation of clarity or connection. Or, as one document puts it, a holy looseness of the tongue and mind. Back in your pew bench haze, you begin to list every good thing you've ever experienced. Sunlight on a cold day, warm bread, a goat that didn't bite you, this beer. Someone begins to sing, not a song with words, a hum, one voice, then another. Soon the abbey echoes with a soft harmony that feels like floating. You hum too. You blend in. The beer helps, and just when you think you've reached your limit of mystical beer contentment, they bring out the second batch. This one is darker, thicker. It pours like ink and smells like roasted barley myrrh and ambition. You raise an eyebrow. The monk nods solemnly as if to say, "Yes, this is the one that sees into your soul." You sip. You see 3 moons. One of them winks. You blink hard and it becomes a lantern, but still it made a point. And here's your curious, slightly strange fact. For the evening, one 14th century monk documented a dream after drinking spiced ale, where he debated with a talking sheep about the nature of temptation. This same monk later helped rewrite local beer regulations. Coincidence? You decide. As your mind gently floats between Gregorian chant and a distant memory of stubbing your toe in 1323, you realize something. This isn't about intoxication. This is sacred inebriation, a deliberate holy tilt of the mind. It's about surrender, about pausing long enough for the soul to loosen its boots. Eventually, the cup empties. The monks rise. One by one they bow and disappear into stone corridors. The fire dims. The room still hums as if the air itself has a heartbeat. You bow in return. You walk outside. The moon is real again. Only one of them. The stars don't sing, but they do twinkle with the smugness of those who've seen centuries of hangovers. You make your way back toward the road. You're lighter now. Not drunk. Just slightly holy. You vow to remember this, and immediately forget the cheese monk's name. 3 mildly blessed monk jokes before bed. If a monk gives you beer, drink. If he gives you a second one, pray. Liquid bread is the best excuse ever invented by someone who wanted a beer before noon. A vow of silence is really just a strategy to avoid explaining what's in the brew. The sun is an accusation. It doesn't rise gently. It bursts over the hills like it's caught you doing something illegal in your sleep. And today, it finds you curled up beneath a sheep cart, breathing through your mouth because your nose has gone on strike. Last night's sacred monastic beer has left a gift, a head full of drums, a mouth like a wool sock, and a deep spiritual yearning for just 5 more minutes of unconsciousness. You peel one eye open. A rooster makes aggressive eye contact. You hate him. This is your introduction to the medieval hangover, a condition so misunderstood even the devil himself was once blamed for it. And while you long for silence, the world insists on noise, blacksmith hammers, market bells, a child yelling about turnips. Somewhere nearby, a pig squeals with what can only be described as vindictive glee. You need help. Enter the village healer, known politely as a physician, and less politely as old Margot, who smells of time and secrets. She has a hut at the edge of the woods and a reputation for treating everything from fevers to broken hearts, usually with the same ointment. You stumble toward her shoes, in hand dignity left behind with your pants wherever they are. Margot greets you with a cackle that curdles milk. She's already steeping something in a pot that smells like a meadow's last breath. Too much Trinitas Fortis? She asks, eyes twinkling. You nod. She shakes her head and mutters something about city boys and holy beer. She begins her treatment. First, a cloth soaked in cool lavender water placed over your eyes. Then a poultice of crushed mint and vinegar slathered on your temples. Finally, a steaming mug of herbal concoction made from dandelion nettle and what might be disappointment. You drink, you gag, you survive. Here's your historical note. Medieval hangover cures varied wildly, but often included herbal infusions, vinegar tonics, or purifying purges. Some healers recommended sleeping in a sack of barley. Others suggested prayer. A 14th century text even proposes eating eels, which tells you everything you need to know about their state of medical understanding. Margot offers you a hard-boiled egg and a small piece of bread. She insists you chew slowly and think about your choices. You do. It doesn't help. Best cure is to not drink so much, she says. You stare at her in a way that suggests you would challenge that theory, but lack the strength to stand. She gives you a parting gift, a sprig of rosemary to sniff when the world spins, and a warning not to mix monastic brews with festival mead again. Too late. You trudge back to the village, head marginally clearer stomach, cautiously optimistic. But the worst is not over, because the town crier sees you, and he announces your state to the square. Behold, the pilgrim returns from the holy fire, clutching his head and weeping like a widow. People cheer. You die inside. And now, the curious detail of the day. In some towns, public drunkenness was punished not with fines, but with ridicule. A wooden board, labeled fool, might be hung around your neck. In one Flemish village, offenders had to wear a hat shaped like a cabbage and sing apologies to geese. It was effective. You try to slink away, but someone stops you. It's Brother Hugo the monk who handed you the second cup. He looks fresh, serene, and unfortunately smug. I see the Trinity is still with you, he says, smiling. You respond with a grunt and an attempt at a nod, which turns into a slow, cautious blink. Hugo hands you a scrap of parchment, a hangover prayer. Dear Lord, thy cup was deep and thine brew was strong. Grant me mercy and a stomach still. You want to frame it. You also want to lie down forever. But instead, you drag yourself to the village bathhouse, a public one shared by everyone, and maintained by a woman named Odette, who believes in very hot water and very little sympathy. You strip slide into the water and immediately regret it. Your skin tingles. Your brain sizzles. Somewhere a lute plays too fast. But then, calm. For a brief moment, the water holds you like a promise. The steam opens your head. The rosemary you'd forgotten in your pocket releases a scent of forgiveness. You sigh, and this, dear listener, is perhaps the truest cure of all: a hot bath, a quiet hour, and no one asking what you did last night. Let's pause for a scholarly question, shall we? Some medieval texts suggest hangovers were seen as moral failings, while others viewed them as inevitable in a world where clean water was unreliable and ale was safer. So, which is it, sin or survival strategy? Or maybe, just maybe, a necessary reminder that too much of even the holy can leave you crawling to old Margot with eel breath. You emerge from the bathhouse reborn, clean, slightly damp, still blinking at birds like they owe you an apology, but alive. You walk to the village square where a feast is being prepared. Not another one. Please. And yet, there it is: roasted vegetables, stewed apples, honeyed nuts, and a modest barrel of something labeled simply "not Trinitas." You laugh, because somehow, despite everything, you're ready. Not for a drink, no, but for the company, the music, the ridiculousness of it all, and maybe, just maybe, a spoonful of stew with your name on it. You are not okay. Let's start there. You are standing inside the great hall of Baron de Frou-Frou, trying not to sway. The ceiling is suspiciously high. The chandelier winks at you with the menace of 1,000 tiny flames. And you tragically, mistakenly, very much not sober, have just been chosen as the royal cupbearer for tonight's feast. Apparently, someone saw you hand old Margot her mug earlier today and thought, that's elegance, that's grace. That's the precision I want with my goblet of fermented cherries. You try to protest. You point out the minor inconvenience of still recovering from a hangover so intense your shadow tried to leave you this morning. But it's too late. The Baron has smiled, and now you are in the inner circle. Literally, standing beside the high table with a silver pitcher, trembling like a guilty squirrel. This is how your night begins, not with a toast, but with a tight smile and a desperate internal monologue about not tripping over your own feet. Let's be clear. Being a cupbearer in medieval times was an honor and a liability. You're the one standing between the nobility and poison, which means your job is partly ceremonial and partly survival instinct. Before each pour, you're expected to taste the drink first, just in case. So naturally, you fake a cough and pretend to sample the wine while mostly just pressing the goblet to your lips like it's the blessed relic of Saint Hangoverius. Now, some fun historical truth. Cupbearers were often young nobles or trusted servants who knew court etiquette, wine temperature, and how to keep secrets. Some were even promoted based on their ability to handle the political chaos of drunk royalty without spilling a drop, or their dignity. You, unfortunately, are just a guy with 2 left feet and a haunted stomach. The Baron raises his chalice. A cheer erupts through the hall. To loyalty, to strength, to fermented plums. You nod politely and internally begin your funeral dirge. The rest of the evening unfolds in slow motion. Act 1. The March of the Goblets. You walk between long wooden tables, pouring for knights who whisper things about last year's harvest, and occasionally attempt to serenade you. One accidentally drops his turkey leg down your boot. You consider retiring. Act The Attack of the Cheese Board. You are lured into conversation by Lady Isabeau, who insists that blue cheese enhances the flavor of sweet wine. She offers you a bite. It tastes like betrayal. You smile. She toasts to the brave fool who tastes our fate before we do. You think that's sweet until you realize she's talking about you. Act 3. The Royal Toast. The Baron rises again. You prepare to pour. He raises a hand. Wait. He wants you to make the toast. Your soul briefly leaves your body. With a dry throat and a damp armpit, you stammer to the vines that gave their all, and to the friends who keep refilling your cup, even when you ask them not to. Surprisingly, it works. Laughter ripples through the hall. Someone throws a pickled onion in appreciation. You survive. But now comes the weird medieval twist of the night. You're led to a side room where a small boy in velvet instructs you to sniff the Baron's wine again, because there are rumors of a plot, and the last guy who drank from that chalice was, well, still sleeping. You obey. It smells like plums. And possibly rosemary. Wait, did old Margot sneak into this bottle too? You hand it back, hoping your brief inspection didn't just make you an accomplice in a noble feud. By midnight, the room blurs into a tapestry of red faces, breadcrumbs, and songs about geese. You've been asked to pour into boots, into helmets, and once into the open mouth of a laughing lord who claimed it was a local tradition. You believe nothing. You're offered coin compliments and a key to someone's stables. You decline all graciously, and then you see her, a quiet woman sitting near the fire. She's not drinking, just watching. Her goblet remains full. She catches your eye and smiles. You approach, offer a refill. She raises a brow. Would you drink from this one? You hesitate, because here's where it gets philosophical. Was the medieval cupbearer a hero, a pawn, or a fool? Scholars debate this. Was the act of tasting wine a selfless protection of one's lord, or a manipulation, selectively sipping to test loyalty or inspire fear? Some texts hint that cupbearers became confidants, power brokers, even spies. You, however, are just trying not to burp. You take her goblet, raise it to your lips, sip. It's water, cool, pure, honest. She nods. Sometimes that's the real luxury. You sit beside her finally. No silver pitcher, no pressure, just two people, one of whom still smells faintly of blue cheese and stress. And this, perhaps, is the quiet truth. In all the noise of wine rolls, power and performance, sometimes you just want someone to offer you water, and mean it. Let's pause for 3 gentle laughs before sleep. A medieval cupbearer's motto, I drink so you don't die. Pouring wine for nobles, while nauseous, should be its own Olympic sport. You haven't lived until someone yells, refill me, coward, across a feasting hall. Now, the fire's down to embers. Your arms ache from lifting silver. Your knees may never recover, but your heart just a little bit lighter. Maybe tomorrow you'll ask the Baron for a new position, something quieter, like moat maintenance or professional onion peeler. But tonight you rest, because being the royal cupbearer was less about wine and more about watching what spills when people let go. And you held steady. Well, mostly. It's market day, which in theory is a wholesome event involving turnips wool and bartering with mild enthusiasm. But not today. Today your tongue is dry, your boots are muddy, and you're being shoved onto a wooden stage in the middle of the village square, surrounded by neighbors holding mugs and expectations. Welcome to the annual Sing for Your Swig festival. You did not sign up for this. You only came to trade half a wheel of sour cheese for a jug of cider. Instead, you were spotted by the mayor's niece, who grabbed your elbow and shouted, "We've got ourselves a new challenger." And now, here you are, stage left, stage fright, and somehow stage sticky. Let's be clear, this is not a polite concert. This is a full medieval singing contest in which the reward for participating is getting absolutely wasted for free, and the penalty for failure is public embarrassment, old bread thrown at your chest, and the lingering shame of being outperformed by a 70-year-old woman named Yvette, who once rhymed ale with snail 17 times in a single verse. The crowd is roaring. A man with 2 teeth and a goat on a leash yells, "Give us a ballad, Butterlegs." You're not sure who Butterlegs is. You hope it's not you. Let's rewind just slightly, because it turns out that public singing contests for alcohol weren't entirely fictional. While there's no record of a Sing for Your Swig brand, there were village fairs across Europe, especially in the 14th and 15th centuries, where entertainers performed for rounds of drink. Folk, music tavern, chants bawdy verses. All were fair game, especially when the ale was flowing and the bread was crusty enough to double as a projectile. Tonight's historical tidbit. In some regions, itinerant minstrels had drink quotas built into their contracts. Perform 3 songs, get 3 mugs. Perform badly. You owe a performance and still get heckled. Performance art has never been more high stakes and low budget. Back to you. Your opponent is already warming up. She's a local legend named Beatrice, age unknown, possibly immortal. She wears 12 scarves, sings with a voice like gravel, soaked in honey, and once allegedly made a merchant cry with a single verse about onions and lost love. She bows. You blink. The contest begins. The format is simple. Call and response verses, each ending with a toast. You're handed a wooden mug. It smells like regret and warm cinnamon. Beatrice begins. There once was a friar from Rouen whose knees were as round as the moon. The crowd claps. She sways. He tripped on a pig, landed flat on his wig, and now sings his sermons out of tune. Roaring applause. She downs her mug. Your turn. You panic. Your mouth opens. Words fall out. There once was a baker named Claude who stored all his flour near the road. You realize you don't know how it ends. You lean into it. A donkey passed by, gave a sneeze. Oh my, my. And now all his bread smells like toads. Silence. Then, laughter. A few claps. A woman in the front snorts. You drink. The mug is heavy. It tastes like spiced apple in victory. Round 2. Beatrice doesn't flinch. My lover was bold and quite hairy. His kisses were warm, though quite scary. You're unsure where this is going. He stole my best duck, then got hit by a truck. Now his ghost haunts my soup with a berry. The crowd erupts. Someone faints. You've got to top that. And so, in your second verse, You go for emotion. I dreamed of a castle so grand with feasts and a gold-laden band. A pause, but I woke in the hay, next to cow smell and clay, still gripping my goblet and hand. That last part may not have made perfect sense, but the drunken honesty sells it. By now, you've both had 2 mugs each. Your legs are looser. Your rhymes are riskier. Someone starts throwing flower petals onto the stage. A pig tries to climb the stairs. Then comes the wild card round. You are handed an object and must incorporate it into a final verse. Yours is a boot. Beatrice's is a fish. She begins with a deep breath. I found a fine fish in my drawer. It blinked at me. Once then, no more. She gently cradles the fish, like a tiny scaly baby. So I pickled it, tight, kissed it softly. Good night. Now it guards all my socks evermore. Thunderous applause. You stare at your boot. You stare at the sky. You inhale. My boot has no soul, just a heel. Yet it knows what it means just to feel. A gasp from the crowd. It's walked through the rain, through heartache and pain, and still kicks like a cartwheel on wheels. There's a pause. Then someone yells, "That boot deserves a drink too." The mayor claps. The fish bows. The contest ends not with a winner, but a shared chant of drink for both. And suddenly, everyone's handing you mugs. The fish gets dunked in cider ceremoniously. Beatrice salutes you. She whispers, "Next year bring your own goat." You nod solemnly. Let's take a moment for 3 very necessary chuckles. Medieval karaoke is 80% rhyming and 20% pretending. The goat chorus is intentional. Your boot is now more emotionally expressive than you've ever been. Beatrice might be an ancient druid disguised as someone's aunt. We love that for her. By the end of the night, you're tucked under a merchant's awning, snoring softly beside the fish and your loyal rhyming boot. The stars blink overhead like they're applauding too. And in this peculiar little corner of the Middle Ages, you've learned something tender and strange. Sometimes to earn your drink, you have to sing your truth, even if it includes frogs, boots, and ghostly ducks. Sleep well, singer of chaos. Tomorrow's silence will taste even sweeter. You wake up face down in straw with a slight scent of fish and poetry lingering in the air. A beetle is sitting on your forehead like it paid rent. Somewhere nearby, a rooster lets out a croaky scream of encouragement. You sit up groggy, blinking at the sun, which quite rudely is doing its whole rays of justice thing. But there's something different. The square is quiet. No drunks staggering from taverns. No wandering lute players. No smell of spilled ale and poor decisions. Only silence punctuated by the shuffle of sandals. You rub your eyes. 3 figures in long woolen robes are standing in front of you, holding scrolls and modest jugs of water. "Greetings," the tallest one says solemnly. "We are the Society of St. Sobrius." Oh no, you've been recruited by a medieval temperance movement. Before you can flee, they hand you a wooden badge that reads, "Dry of spirit, rich in purpose," and welcome you into their daily march through the village. You're now part of the Cloister of Clarity, an anti-ale collective devoted to detaching mankind from the demon barley, which, by the way, is historically plausible. There were pockets of religious or moral reformers during the Middle Ages, especially in monastic and rural communities, who campaigned against excessive drinking. Though not as organized as later temperance movements, they existed, writing tracts, preaching sermons, and occasionally ruining festivals with pamphlets. Your group doesn't believe in pamphlets. They believe in chants. You walk slowly down the main road, repeating, "Sobriety is clarity. The mug shall not define me." There's a child watching you with a half-eaten turnip. He looks disappointed in your life choices. Behind you, one of the society members whispers about the dangers of honeyed mead, which to them is a direct invention of Satan's kitchen. You remember you had 6 mugs of it last night. Oops. As you pass the town square, a familiar voice calls out, "Hey, it's Butterlegs. It's the goat guy." He's holding a jug and waving. The goat is chewing on a cider-soaked boot. The tallest society member turns to you with pursed lips. "We shall now cleanse your social bonds," he says. You don't know what that means. Apparently, it involves performing a symbolic burial of your drinking past in the village garden. You are asked to write down the name of your most intoxicating sin on a turnip and plant it under the cabbage patch. You write mold mayhem and bury the poor root vegetable next to a carrot labeled temptress ale. Let's pause for tonight's weird historical detail. In the 13th century, some monks in Central Europe believed that intoxication weakened the soul's ability to perceive divine light, which is poetic if slightly inconvenient during winter feasts. Back to you. You're handed your new schedule: dawn, quiet reflection; noon, bread and water; evening, moral theater performance in socks. You look around. Everyone is very, very serious. You are given a robe. It itches in 7 different languages. You're told to renounce your tavern loyalty by writing a letter of apology to the local innkeeper. They even give you a feather quill and a template: "Dearest Barrel and Spoon Tavern, I no longer require your fermented lies. My cup now runneth over with wisdom. Regards, an enlightened one." You are expected to hand-deliver it, which you do. Later that evening, you knock sheepishly at the tavern door. The innkeeper, a burly man with a beard like a toasted broom, opens it, reads the letter, and blinks. "Is this because of the fermented parsnip incident?" he asks. You just nod. "Fair enough," he says. Then he hands you a small bag of roasted nuts and tells you, "Come back when you remember who you are." That hits deeper than expected. You return to the society's quarters, a dim barn with chalk messages on the walls like "Clarity is the real ale" and "Froth is the enemy of focus." That night, you lie on your straw mat facing the ceiling beams, and you begin to doubt. Because here's the thing: the Middle Ages didn't treat drinking like a binary sin. In fact, alcohol was often safer than water and considered a gift from God when consumed in moderation. Monks brewed beer. Peasants fermented apples. Even sermons included wine metaphors. The issue wasn't drinking, it was excess. The real sin wasn't the drink, but what you did with it. So, maybe this society isn't wrong, but maybe it's not entirely right either. In the morning, your duties begin. You sweep the common room. You memorize 4 anti-wine proverbs. You help repair the barn door with twine and humility. And then, you're taken on your first outreach mission. You walk to the nearby village where the annual Bard and Brandy bonfire is taking place. Your role: to stand silently beside the cider barrels, holding a scroll that reads, "Drink deep and you may drown." A boy throws a roasted apple at your scroll. It bounces off harmlessly. A woman offers you a mug of just emotional support wine. You decline, but she winks and says, "Suit yourself, Clarity Boy." Then she sings a song about a frog who drank too much and fell in love with a duck-shaped shoe. You laugh. Out loud. A fellow society member glares. That night, back in the barn, you are called before the council. The accusation: joy leakage. The punishment: straw bed, isolation. And a lecture about spontaneous rhyming. Let's take a moment to sip three very gentle jokes. You've accidentally joined a monastery with worse wine and more judgment. You miss your emotional support wine. She had a lovely accent. That frog duck shoe ballad might still win next year's festival. After 3 days, you wake up and realize something. You don't need the society of St. Sobrius. You don't need to be constantly drinking either. What you do need is balance. So you quietly fold your robe, leave it beside a note that says, "Thank you, but I've decided to emotionally support myself," and walk back toward the village. You pass the cabbage patch. Your turnip has sprouted. You smile. Back in town, you hear a familiar voice, Beatrice. She's singing about bread theft and spiritual growth. Her scarf count is up to 14. You slip into the crowd, quietly clapping along. And as the stars rise, you find yourself holding a warm mug, not too full, not too empty, just enough to taste, just enough to remember who you are. You've just managed to reacquaint yourself with a sense of inner moderation. You've left behind the dry-robed society of sobriety, returned to the land of cider sipping and turnip festivals, and rediscovered the joy of drinking only half a mug and remembering the lyrics to a song afterward. So naturally, this is the exact moment fate decides to throw you into a noble wedding. It begins with a loaf of bread. You're nibbling one end of a very dry, very untrustworthy crust outside the village square when a horse-drawn cart rolls by in a flurry of silk and geese. A man in velvet yells something about needing extra guests. "Quick," he cries, pointing at you. You look appropriately unwashed and poetic. Before you can protest, you're shoved into the back of the cart, handed a floral sash, and told you're now representing the countryside cousin of Lady Fernelda on her father's second side. That's how you arrive at the wedding of the century, held at a nearby manor house with banners the size of boats and wine barrels stacked like medieval pyramids. Now this may surprise you, but medieval noble weddings weren't always elegant affairs. They were part feast, part political alliance, and part drink until you forget you're marrying your cousin. The vows were short. The party was long. The pigs were roasted whole, and the jester had opinions about everything. You're escorted through the gate by a servant wearing shoes so shiny they could signal ships. The air smells like lavender and cooked poultry. Somewhere, a band of lute players is tuning up in D minor, widely considered the most dramatic key, obviously. A voice calls out, "Ah, cousin, we were just waiting on you." You are kissed on both cheeks by Lady Fernelda, a woman in a gown that looks like it was stitched entirely from embroidery patterns and possibly hubris. She smells like violets and stern expectations. You attempt a bow. It comes out more like a squat. No one corrects you. The feast begins. You are seated at a long, winding table covered in trenchers, flat stale bread, used as plates, pies of suspicious complexity, and goblets the size of soup bowls. Every time you sip your wine, a servant refills it before the rim can dry. "Hydration is nobility," the man beside you says, winking. His name is Lord Thistlebrim, and he claims to own half a bridge somewhere in Kent. Over the next 2 hours, you witness and consume a bewildering assortment of noble wedding beverages. Let's break it down. Mead, mulled with rose petals. Claret, spiced with pepper and honey. Ale, reserved for lesser cousins, hello you. Cherry liquor, stored in walnut shells. And something called dragon's breath, which is mostly regret and cinnamon. Let's pause for tonight's actual historical insight. Medieval weddings often involved multiple rounds of drink, each tied to a different ritual, from the contract toasts, bedding ceremony, don't ask, and post-dawn soup. Special wines were imported for nobles, including Malmsey, a sweet wine from the Mediterranean, which Shakespeare later had someone drown in. Romantic. Back to you. Your sash has become misaligned from all the claret sipping and emotional applause. The wedding toasts begin. Each guest stands, announces a vaguely threatening poem about love, and downs an entire cup of wine. The rhyme schemes are aggressive, the metaphors increasingly mushroom-based. Someone recites, "Love is a pheasant wild and plump. It waddles in joy until it meets the stump." Everyone claps. You follow suit, standing and shouting to cousinhood. It's met with raucous approval. You sit down, feeling both proud and slightly sticky. As the feast deepens into night, the drinking games begin. Yes, even among nobility, the rules are absurdly complex. If someone mentions swan, you drink. If someone spills, everyone drinks. If someone winks, you toast to eyesight. If someone mentions bread, the last to touch their crust drinks twice. It's a nightmare for your short-term memory. Eventually, you're led to the blessing circle, where each guest walks in a spiral and offers words of marital advice while balancing a cup of mead on their head. You try your best. May your marriage be like stew, thick, warm, and occasionally stirred. It gets a cheer. The mead tumbles. You're forgiven. A jester with bells on his elbows accuses you of being too sober to dance. This is slander. You have been consuming rose claret at a steady rate for 2 hours. You're precisely 1.3 goblets from singing sea shanties in a Latin accent. A drum beat starts. Lutes join. The noble dance floor opens a rectangle of straw and stolen confidence. You are paired with Lady Jeffrina, who is at least 80 years old and has sharper knees than a woodcutter. She leads you through the courtly steps of the Widderschen waltz while critiquing your breath. You survive 3 songs, a near miss with a roast duck tray, and 2 full goblets of something described as pear thunder. Then, disaster strikes. Someone mistakes you for a real noble cousin and asks you to deliver the midnight toast. You climb onto a barrel. You raise your mug, and with all the sincerity of someone who's had 7 types of medieval wine, you declare, "To love, to life, to knowing when to stop." You pause. The crowd waits, and you, noble and fermented, say, "And to the goose who taught me about balance." This earns applause, a toast in your name, and a sudden rush of emotion. You sit, you sway, and you reflect. Because noble or peasant monk or merrymaker, the experience of getting wasted in medieval times wasn't just about drinking. It was about rituals, community celebration, anxiety, avoidance, and storytelling. Wine was woven into everything: weddings, funerals, treaties, songs. It was liquid memory, sometimes misused, often misunderstood, but always present. Now, your strange historical tidbit. During the Middle Ages, some aristocrats hired wine advisors to determine the safest amount to serve to guests without causing disgrace. It was considered a moral duty not to over-inebriate nobles from rival families, though it happened often anyway, especially at weddings. Back in the present moment, you stumble toward a bench near the manor garden. The stars are doing their best impression of sequins. A dog is asleep with a roast chicken leg. Someone nearby is humming the mushroom poem again. You sit with a final mug of something plum-like and mellow. You smile. Lady Fernelda passes by, sees your sash, which is now worn like a failed scarf, and says, "Well, cousin, you've done the family proud." You nod. You honestly have no idea who she is anymore, but you're grateful. Because tonight, you didn't just survive a noble wedding. You drank like a count, danced like a cousin, and toasted like a legend. The sun doesn't rise so much as it yells through a crack in the wooden shutters, landing directly on your eyelids like it has a personal grudge. You wake up in a barrel. Technically, you're curled inside a half-empty wine cask, now horizontal and lined with your own regrets. Your floral wedding sash is wrapped around your ankle like a victory flag from a kingdom you didn't mean to conquer. Your head hums with the low, persistent ache of someone who drank wine intended for diplomatic ceremonies and noble feuds. Somewhere in your body, a lute is playing off-key. Your mouth tastes like pear thunder and hay. You sit up. You realize, with a slow-motion sense of horror, that you've been left in the wine cellar overnight. Not locked in, just forgotten, like the parsley garnish on a roast pig. Or that one cousin no one talks about since the bean fire of 46. You attempt to stand. You immediately regret that. The stone floor is cool against your forehead. Then footsteps, boots, voices. "You a man," shouts peering into the cellar gloom. "You're the cousin from the toast, aren't you? The goose one." You nod. Possibly. It sounds familiar. Well, come along then. They need you in the fermentation room. And before you can protest, you're hauled to your feet, handed a ladle, and shoved through a wooden door into a new phase of your medieval experience. You are now an honorary wine apprentice, because as it turns out, someone told the steward that Lady Fernelda's cousin is very passionate about winecraft, and now you're expected to assist the monastic vintners with their seasonal barrel rotation and grape mash monitoring. Congratulations! Your first task is to stir the lees, the sediment at the bottom of fermenting wine barrels. It smells like fruit and ancient arguments. A monk with startlingly red cheeks explains the wine must breathe. You must swirl it gently, like thoughts in a philosopher's head. You swirl, you inhale. You wonder if philosophers ever passed out in barrels. As your vision stabilizes, you begin to understand the strange rhythm of the medieval winemaking process. Here's your historical nugget for the day. Medieval wine wasn't aged like modern wine. It was meant to be drunk young, often within a year of fermentation. Aging required stable temperature and space, things monasteries sometimes had, but peasant homes did not. That's why most people drank wine that would probably make a modern sommelier faint on contact. In this fermentation chamber, though, it's all about rituals. The monks pray over the barrels. They sing psalms while bottling. One particularly intense monk brother, Winifred, believes that each cask contains the soul of a saintly grape. You avoid making eye contact with him after that. Eventually, your hands stop shaking from wedding wine and start shaking from actual labor. You mash grapes with a long wooden pole, then with your feet, which are washed first in holy water. They insist. You don't ask. You ladle juice into clay jars. You label them using ink, made from crushed berries, and judgment. And somewhere between your third chant and your fifth misstep into sticky grape mush, you begin to feel oddly peaceful. It's the kind of work that doesn't allow your mind to wander too far. Because if it does, you'll trip over a jug, which you do, twice. Now let's take a detour into today's delightfully weird side fact. Some medieval vintners believed that music could influence fermentation. That's right. In certain abbeys, monks would sing directly into the barrels Gregorian chants most often believing the rhythm calmed the wine and enhanced its spirit. This might be history's first experiment in vibe-based chemistry. Back in your very real, very sticky present, you're humming just to blend in until someone hands you a goblet of freshly pressed wine and says, "Test it. We need a taster." You hesitate. Testing wine while hungover is like taste testing fire while still smoking, but you are noble-ish, brave-ish, still slightly sash adjacent. You sip. It tastes surprisingly floral, then alarmingly sour, then weirdly like your own foot. You nod. It has notes, you say, as diplomatically as you can manage. The monks nod, satisfied. One writes, noted in Latin, on a chalk slate. This apparently means you've passed the trial. You are now cleared to help with the festival of the first cask, a strange little ritual where the first barrel of new wine is rolled into the village square and blessed by a local child with a feather hat. Yes, it's real. Yes, it's adorable. Yes, you are now in charge of steering the barrel cart. Your hands are sticky. Your soul is tired, but you smile because there's something oddly wholesome about this moment, about seeing people cheer as wine arrives like a guest of honor. Even the chickens get excited. One tries to perch on the barrel. You gently remove it with a firm "please don't." The crowd claps as the feather-hatted child declares the vintage ticklish on the tongue. The monks bow. The villagers queue up, and you realize the line between drinking and ritual is thinner than you thought. In the Middle Ages, wine wasn't just a beverage. It was identity, economy, faith, a coping mechanism, a sacred fluid, a public good, a private crutch. And sometimes, as with you, it was also a very unexpected career path. You find a bench near the baker's stall and sit with a small cup of the new wine. It's still too young, still a little sharp, but it's honest, unapologetic. Like most things in this world, a friar joins you. His robe is stained with elderberry. He says, "You were in the cellar, weren't you?" You nod. He laughs. "That's how I got started, too." And just like that, you're no longer alone in this strange, fermented corner of time. The two of you sit in silence as the sun dips behind the chimney of the village tavern. The air smells like sweet bread and wood smoke. A child is chasing a goose, which feels symbolic, though you're not sure why. You sip again. Your sash has become a headband. You don't correct it. Because right now, everything feels oddly correct. You might never be a proper noble or a proper monk. But for today, you're something better. A person who got completely wasted at a medieval wedding, woke up in a barrel, and turned it into a temporary job with actual grape-stomping privileges that you think is progress. You're holding a cup of wine when the argument begins, not a dramatic shouting match. No, this is the quiet kind of argument, the kind that begins with one man clearing his throat too pointedly while eyeing your goblet like it contains heresy. You're still seated on the edge of the festival square, wine-stained, grape-scented, and faintly radiant from your newfound role as honorary cellar goblin. And that's when a man in a cream-colored tunic and a large wooden cross steps forward and says very gently, "You know, that wine hasn't been purified." You blink. Purified, you echo, unsure if this is a hygiene issue, a theological concern, or a new medieval trend, like cucumber fasting. He nods. The grapes weren't sung over by women of faith. The barrels weren't kissed by sunlight through sacred glass. And it was stirred on a Tuesday. We only drink wine that has been blessed under the waxing moon by candlelight, scented with rosemary and regret. Oh, you've stumbled into a cult A wine cult, of course, because it's the 14th century. And of course, there's a sect of spiritual vintners who believe that wine can only be considered clean if it's never touched by anyone who has made eye contact with a chicken. You sip your wine defiantly. The man flinches. He gestures toward a nearby tent. Modest linen smells faintly of incense and boiled beet, and says, "We'd love to explain the way of the unclouded cup to you. And because you've been through a wedding, a barrel nap, and 3 kinds of fermentation therapy today, you go. Why not inside the tent are 6 other people, all dressed in varying shades of beige. There is a circle of chairs, a large diagram of a grape cut in half, and a sign that says, "Ferment the soul before the skin." No one is entirely sober. A woman with no eyebrows stands and says, "Welcome, weary pilgrim. Tonight we speak of purity." You sit slowly. You are handed a pamphlet made of parchment. It reads, "The 8 Vintages of the Spirit, a guide to not dying spiritually every time you sip." You skim it. The 8 vintages include the wine of humility made from grapes, grown upside down, the wine of clarity filtered through lamb's wool and celibacy, the wine of submission, no sugar, no joy, no eye contact, the wine of the first pigeon, self-explanatory, the wine of reflection, served only in mirrored goblets, the wine of sacrifice, aged in barrels that used to store onions, the wine of departure, poured never drunk, the wine of reunion, a blend you're told you aren't ready for yet. You ask the obvious, "Is this wine?" The no-eyebrow woman nods solemnly. It is the idea of wine, the essence, the whisper of grapes unmarred by worldly yeast. You resist the urge to whisper, "That's just juice." Instead, you say, "I had wine made by monks this morning." Gasps. A man clutches his chest like you confessed to eating soup during a funeral. "Monks," he says, scandalized. They age their wine. They touch it with tools. They enjoy it. He makes it sound like the monastic order is 1 step away from opening a tavern called Ye Old Naughty Barrel. But this is where things get academically fascinating, because here's your historical truth of the evening. In the 13th, 14th centuries, there were genuine debates about what made wine pure, especially for religious use. Some sects rejected wines made with additives like honey herbs or boiled resin, believing only the natural fermentation of unsullied grapes could produce wine fit for the altar. The problem: medieval wine always needed help. Grapes varied wildly. Preservation was inconsistent. Herbs masked sourness. Resin was common. Without additives, most wine spoiled or tasted like sour goat tears. Which brings us to the hilariously tragic academic debate. Is wine still sacred if it's been helped along by human hands? Or is the true spirit found in the accidental, the flawed, the fermenty mess that nature left behind? The cult Sorry Fellowship leans hard into the idea that purity comes from inaction. To truly honor the grape, says the eyebrowless woman, you must let it suffer alone. You nod slowly. It's a compelling theology if you're a grape. Then she pours you a cup. It is cloudy, gray. It smells like damp poetry and unprocessed emotions. You sip. It tastes like betrayal, like someone tried to turn bread dough into an apology and failed halfway through. But you say interesting, because you are polite. Would you like to join us? Someone asks. And suddenly the air shifts. They lean forward, all beige tunics, and hope. You've clearly been touched by the barrel, one says. Your aura smells like crushed virtue, another adds. We can give you a new name, someone suggests. like what they confer. Someone whispers Cremant of the lost sip. You say that sounds like a dragon who writes poetry. They nod in delight. You realize they're serious. You sip more betrayal juice. It gets worse. But here's the thing. They're kind. They offer you bread. They sing hymns that rhyme, sort of. One of them has a really lovely singing voice. They laugh. They gossip. They argue about whether a grape grown near garlic loses its spiritual alignment. It's all very strange, but also very human. People looking for order and chaos, meaning and mildew, holiness and hangovers. You politely decline full membership, something about needing to reflect further while sitting very far away with other beverages, and they respect that. You leave with a small pin that says Pilgrim of the 8th Vintage and a warm potato wrapped in moss. You return to the festival square to find that the monks are now debating with the tavern owners about who gets to declare the wine official for the harvest. And that's your segue into today's weird little side detail. In some regions, wine approval was a public ritual, complete with tasting councils, blessing ceremonies, and even wine juries. If the batch failed, it could be banned, taxed differently, or publicly shamed. Imagine the Yelp review, but medieval and enforced by people in cloaks. You witness one of these micro-councils now. A group of elders in large hats, probably chosen for their hat size, not taste buds, taste the wine. One declares, it dances, but does not sing. Another says, too many legs, not enough story. A third mutters, it's fine. This apparently is a diplomatic disaster. The monk argues back. It was fermented under the watch of St. Bernard's goat. The tavern keeper shrugs. So was my foot, but I'm not selling that. You step away before someone suggests a duel by barrel. By now, the sun has melted behind the steeple. The square glows with lanterns, and you once again are invited to drink. But this time you sip slowly. You reflect. There's power in all this ritual, in declaring something sacred just because you need it to be, whether it's monks, blessing barrels, or cults refusing sugar, whether it's a feather-hatted child whispering blessings, or a jury of big hats arguing about mouthfeel. Wine, like everything else in the medieval world, is not just about taste. It's about trust. You lean back against a barrel, a new barrel. You don't climb in, not this time. You sip and smile and think. If someone ever asks you what medieval drinking was really like, you'll say, it was fermented faith, shaken ego, and a surprisingly strong aftertaste of theology. And if they press further, just nod slowly and whisper, Cremant of the lost sip. Let them wonder. It all begins, as these things often do, with a banner. You're simply walking across the courtyard, eating a piece of bread that's been blessed, unblessed, and then re-blessed for safety. You're enjoying the sunlight, which in medieval times is both a warm luxury and a mild threat. When you spot it, a massive red banner unfurling above the market square. It reads, The Royal Cup of Endurance, all may enter. Survival not guaranteed. Prize is unknown. Underneath is a smaller sign, in less confident handwriting, participants must bring their own mug. And because you are many things, curious, sleep-deprived, mildly tipsy, but not someone who backs down from questionable challenges you enter. You do not bring a mug, you bring a ladle. This is your first mistake. Your second mistake is not reading the fine print. The Royal Cup is not just a drinking competition. It is a theatrical ordeal steeped in tradition, designed by monarchs who confuse fun with ordeal. You are not just drinking. You are performing for nobles, clergy, and a suspicious number of goats. You are handed a sash. It reads, Barrel Knight, West District. You're not from the West District. You ask why. The steward shrugs. The real one fainted. You looked upright. And that is how you find yourself in a wooden ring, surrounded by cheering townsfolk across from a woman known only as Miriam the Fermented. A trumpet sounds. Round 1. Ale of the peasant's resilience. You are handed a cup the size of a toddler. It smells like turnips and determination. You drink. Miriam drinks. You both survive. Round 2. Mead of matrimonial courage. This mead is served in a goblet shaped like a ring. You don't ask questions. It tastes like regrets and wedding speeches. Miriam burps and birds scatter. You burp back. Respect is earned. Round 3. Witch's broth. This is not wine. This is a grayish liquid made with sage pear skins and something called night courage. It hisses slightly. You drink. You feel a memory from childhood apologize to you. Miriam does not blink. Neither do you. The crowd roars. Between rounds, there are dramatic announcements. A man in armor reads scrolls of poetry about wine. A bard strums a harp and sings, "O thou who sippeth still, may thine liver be a stone." You begin to suspect you are hallucinating. A historical aside. In medieval courts, drinking competitions were both entertainment and political theater. To be able to hold your drink was to show strength. To outlast your peers was to prove favor from God. And to vomit before the third round, that was the mark of an amateur. Or worse, an accountant. Back in the arena, round 4 begins the nobleman's boredom. This is the blandest white wine in existence. It is served warm. It tastes like paper and diplomacy. Your soul sighs. Miriam winks. You both finish. Round 5. Red of the reckoning. This one burns. It was aged in a cask previously used for storing black pepper and trauma. You drink. Your eyebrows sweat. Miriam blinks once slowly, like a cat deciding whether to attack or adopt you. There are now 12 competitors left. A monk blesses each remaining cup with a prayer and a slap. You reach round 6. This is where things begin to unravel. The goblet of the fool's pride is filled with a bubbling golden liquid, rumored to be part honey, part magic, and part something that once stared directly into the sun. It smells like ambition. You drink. The world tilts slightly to the left. A noble in the audience faints. You're fairly sure someone behind you just declared a duel with a potato. You keep going. You begin to sweat wine. Round 7 is called the Emperor's Hangover. It's a mix of 5 drinks each, poured by someone with a different opinion about ethics. It's warm spiced and slightly minty. It tastes like someone tried to bottle hubris. You drink, and now there are only 3 of you. You, Miriam, and a man known only as Sir Bubbles, who wears no armor, only a hat shaped like a fish. He bows. May the cup favor the bold. You nod. Someone screams from the stands, "Do it for the Barrel Knights." You wave, limply. Round 8. The Forgotten Brew. No one knows what this is. It was found in a monastery cellar behind a wall. The cup is ceramic and sweating. You take a sip, and suddenly, you know the name of every goat in the kingdom. You are very aware of your knees. You whisper to Miriam, "Is this normal?" She says, "My arms have turned into poetry." You nod, because this seems fair. The judges now convene. They wear robes and smell faintly of elderberries. They ask each finalist a question. If you were a wine, what would your purpose be? You say to remind people that joy is messy. Miriam says, to make sorrow dance. Sir Bubbles says, to taste like Tuesday and betrayal. They nod. Round 9, final toast. The last drink is poured into a goblet shaped like a crown. You each must drink, deliver a final toast, and stand for 5 minutes without swaying. You sip. It is beautiful. This wine is unlike any you've tasted. Rich, deep, melancholy, and bright all at once. It tastes like truth, if truth wore velvet and sang lullabies. Your toast. To the strange things we drink, the stranger things we survive, and the stories that come from both. Miriam raises her cup. To everything we remember, and everything we laugh about because we forgot. Sir Bubbles whispers, to mystery, to mischief, to mayhem. Silence. Then wild applause. The judges confer. A decision is reached. You all win, because as the scroll reader declares, they have endured. They have inspired, and none of them have fainted. You nearly did, but caught yourself on a bard. The prize, a kiss on the forehead from the Queen's goat, and a golden mug that says, I sipped the crown. It is the best and worst moment of your life. You leave the arena staggering but proud. You will not remember most of it, but you will feel it in your bones for days. Historical note to self, getting wasted in medieval times was never just about losing control. It was a ritual, a release, a reassertion of chaos in a world too bound by order. You look at your golden mug. It's already slightly dented. Perfect. That night, as you lie on a straw bed, whispering thanks to your liver, you smile. You made it, and the goat didn't bite you. A good day, by any century's standards. You wake up in someone else's hat. This is your first clue that something has gone very, very right or very, very wrong. It's a tall velvet hat, the kind worn by minor nobles who own suspiciously few teeth and far too many horses. It smells like lavender bad decisions and faint regret. You gently remove it from your head and place it on the straw floor like it might explode. Then you assess your surroundings. You are in a barn. There are chickens, 2 sleeping monks, a bard using a lute as a pillow, and a goat sitting precisely 1 inch from your face. You remember the goat. It kissed your forehead last night, or possibly head-butted it. Either way, there was a moment of royal recognition involving fur and dignity. You sit up. This is a mistake. The barn spins gently. Your bones file a complaint. Your mouth tastes like fermented leather and citrus betrayal. You whisper, water, like a medieval ghost searching for closure. A peasant passing by hands you a cup of something. You drink. It's not water. It's onion broth. And just like that, you're awake. Your vision clears. Sort of. The monk to your left mumbles a hymn in reverse. The goat nods solemnly. You are re-entering the world. Now here's the thing about hangovers in the Middle Ages. They weren't called hangovers. They were called divine punishments, bad humors, or that which follows the evening of pride. Remedies varied from chewed herbs to goose fat massages to yelling at the sky. You opt for a gentler approach. You step outside. The sun does not shine. It glares. The air smells like soup hooves and bread that's trying its best. Somewhere in the distance, a bell rings 13 times, which is either a mistake or a new holiday. And then you notice it. The parade. There's a parade. You're in it. Or you were. A nearby herald approaches you with the calm menace of someone who has seen too many festivals. He says, "You're late for the final honoring." You say, "I don't remember signing up." He says, "You don't need to remember. You're the champion of sobriety." You blink. "I won." He shrugs. "No. But you're the only one still upright." You are promptly handed a sash that says, "Still technically conscious." You wear it with pride. The final honoring, it turns out, is a procession through the village to celebrate those who survived the royal cup. You are the lone honoree. You are also the sole survivor of the after party. A child throws flowers at your feet. A local dog howls in reverence. A woman hands you a pie and says, "For strength." You eat it. It is made entirely of turnips. The town crier bellows your achievements. Behold the barrel night drinker of the forgotten brew dancer with the goat of queens, he who outlasted bubbles. You wave. Your body disagrees. Now, while medieval hangovers were brutal, they were often treated with more drinking. A weaker version of ale or wine was considered medicinal, like training wheels for the soul. You are offered such a drink. You politely decline. The brewer frowns. "It's got rosemary in it. Good for clarity." You ask if it has regret in it. They don't laugh. You move on. And then it happens. The smell. It creeps up slowly, like shame after a wedding speech. It is ancient. It is powerful. It is unmistakable. Someone nearby is carrying a medieval cure-all stew, a bubbling pot known only as the resetter. You have heard tales. It contains stale beer, roasted garlic, cabbage leaves, powdered eggshell, a dash of old sermon, and something called monk's second thoughts. You take one whiff and remember your childhood, your first heartbreak, and the exact moment you stopped trusting fermented plums. But you are a champion now. You drink it, and miraculously, you feel better. Not amazing, not poetic, but functional. Like a door that creaks but still opens. Like a rooster that crows slightly offbeat but means well. You return to the barn. The monk is awake. He nods solemnly. You made it. You nod back. Barely. He hands you a scroll. It is an invitation to next year's Royal Cup. The ink is still drying. You laugh. Then you set it on fire with a nearby candle. The monk smiles. Wise. Now let's reflect, shall we? The medieval world treated alcohol not as an escape, but as a shared experience, a ritual, a bonding force. Yes, it led to bad choices, but it also created music myths and entire dances named after vegetables. To be drunk was to be human loudly, and to survive it, that was art. As the sun begins to set, you lie down in the barn once more. The goat curls up beside you. Someone sings a lullaby about barley and bravery. You smile, because here, in the haze of aftermath, you feel it, the camaraderie, the absurdity, the survival. You were wrecked, rebuilt, and possibly crowned by livestock. You whisper, "Maybe just one more festival next year." The goat snorts. Fair. Now, as the soft darkness folds around you, your muscles ache in poetry. Your head hums in C minor, and your stomach grumbles a warning about the onion broth. Still, you made it. You're alive. And most importantly, you're done. That's the story of your medieval bender. A tale of mystery, mead mild trauma, and triumph by turnip. You're officially the patron saint of poor decisions made with style. Now drift off, friend, and if you dream, Let it be of bonfires, silly songs, and the quiet pride of waking up with a goat as your witness. And now, the story is over. You've danced through mead halls, spilled secrets into barrels, and worn a sash you didn't ask for, but maybe always needed. You've tasted turnip pie, made peace with a goat, and outlived a hangover that could scare away the bravest knight. And yet here you are, still breathing, still warm beneath the covers, still smiling at the thought of a town crier shouting your name like a half-forgotten melody. It's funny, isn't it? The way a silly night from long ago can still echo like laughter down a quiet corridor. The way even the most chaotic moments can become gentle in hindsight, softened by time, by sleep, by story. So let this be your soft landing. Whatever kind of day you've had, it's done now. You're safe, you're cozy, and somewhere in the folds of your imagination, a goat is curling up beside you like a fuzzy punctuation mark at the end of a very, very strange sentence. Let your breath slow. Let your muscles melt. Let the laughter fade gently into peace, because even in the silliest corners of history, there's a quiet lesson that joy and survival often come from the same place, the choice to rest, to recover, and to remember the good parts with a grin. That's the story. For tonight, may your dreams be filled with wonder and peace.